Chapter 1. I want to marry into the Brown family. The York family is good, they're wealthy. Marry the girl off to bring good fortune, and we'll get a decent dowry. If young Master York recovers, Clara will be their benefactor, and we can ask for as much money as we want. If the fortune-bringing fails, let Clara be buried alongside young Master York, and we'll have another excuse to demand a large sum. The Neeson family makes even more sense. Although their son has beaten 3 wives to death, every time they compensated the bride's family with 2 taels of silver. What's more important is that the Neeson family has been a single male heir for 9 generations. The previous 3 wives only gave birth to daughters, unable to produce a son. If Clara marries into their family and gives birth to a boy, wouldn't the Neeson family's fortune belong to our grandson? By then, if we ever need anything, the Neeson family will have to help out for their grandson's sake. The York family. The York family is full of scholars, easy to reason with. The Neeson family is nearby, convenient to visit if anything happens. Clara Smith carried 2 buckets of water back home, only to overhear her parents and older brother huddled in the main room, loudly debating how to sell her off for the highest price. When they noticed her return, the 3 of them merely glanced at her before continuing their discussion, treating her as if she were invisible. Expressionless, Clara Smith carried the water into the kitchen. After pouring the water into the storage jar, she sighed in relief and casually picked up Lily Smith, who was nibbling on her fingers in the cradle. "Big sister!" The moment she nestled into Clara's arms, Lily Smith sweetly called out, her tiny hands clinging tightly to her. Holding the soft, warm bundle in her arms, Clara Smith felt a faint sense of being alive. Sigh, it had already been 5 days since she arrived in this world. She still vividly remembered the moment she successfully held her personal art exhibition. In the next instant, her scumbag ex-boyfriend had burst through the crowd, kneeling to beg for reconciliation. She had outright refused him, and in response, he pulled out a knife. She blacked out from the pain, and when she woke up, she had become the daughter of the Smith family, a destitute household in the village. A pitiful girl about to be sold off by her parents to fund her brother's marriage. The only unresolved matter was which family she would be sold to. Her father and brother had been arguing for 5 days without reaching a conclusion. However, in their greed to maximize the dowry, the 2 had set their sights on the worst men within a 10-mile radius, comparing them as if it were a competition. Did they really think she was foolish enough to let them decide her fate? Dream on. Clara Smith lowered her head, the corner of her mouth curling into a cold smile. Just as the 3 were still quarreling, someone arrived. It was none other than matchmaker Watson, a well-known figure across the 10-mile 8 village area. The middle-aged matchmaker, her face caked with cheap powder, stepped into the house and impatiently shouted, "David Smith, have you made up your mind yet? Who exactly is Clara marrying? The York family, the Neeson family, or the Brown family? They're all waiting for an answer. Especially the Yorks and the Neesons. Plenty of people are eyeing this opportunity. If you don't decide soon, someone else might snatch the marriage." The Smith family grew anxious upon hearing this. "We've decided. Clara will marry into the York family," David Smith, Clara's father, quickly declared. "No, the Neeson family," her eldest brother George Smith shouted in disagreement. "I've already said it. Marry her into the York family. They have a good reputation. Clara marrying there will bring us pride." "What's the use of reputation? It's better to marry her into the Neeson family. Money is what matters." Seeing the Smith father and son arguing loudly again, Clara Smith suddenly raised her voice, speaking her first words after 5 days of silence. "The York family, the Neeson family, I won't marry into either. I'll marry into the Brown family." As soon as she finished, the 2 Smith men, who had been fiercely quarreling, immediately turned around and glared at her. "Clara, Have you lost your mind after falling into the water? Do you even know what the Brown family is like? Their family business is in decline. They have no siblings to help out, and there are already 3 children in the house, 2 of whom are grown sons. Exactly. And the most important thing is that he explicitly said the new wife is not allowed to have children. If you don't bear children, how are you going to secure a position in that family and bring anything back to help your birth family? Even though they were marrying off their daughter, these 2 still hadn't given up on exploiting her. Clara Smith thought to herself, if it weren't for the conditions set by the Brown family, she wouldn't even consider marrying them. In her previous life, she had died at the hands of a man, and to this day, she still felt a lingering fear whenever an adult man came near her. In this life, she wanted nothing to do with men. She had no intention of getting married at all. But in this backward era, if she were to voice such thoughts, she'd likely be beaten to death. So she had to compromise, find a man who wouldn't require consummation, and live out her days quietly. Among the 3 potential suitors, the only one who met her condition was the Brown family. After all, the man had made it clear when proposing that he wouldn't have any more children. In this era of poor medical care, the only way to ensure no children was to avoid consummation entirely. Of course, she wasn't foolish enough to say this out loud. Instead, Clara Smith pretended to seriously analyze the situation for them. Father, brother, have you forgotten? The bride price offered by the York and Neeson families is only 10 taels of silver, but the Brown family is offering 12. With that money, brother could not only pay the bride price for Sister Daisy Wilson, but also have enough left over to throw a grand wedding to bring her home. Imagine how much pride that would bring to our family in the village. George Smith's eyes lit up immediately upon hearing this. But David Smith still objected. Just 2 extra taels of silver. What's the big deal? If you marry into the York or Neeson families, you could earn that much in less than a year to honor us. Clara Smith suppressed her growing frustration. What if I told you I could get him to add 3 more taels to the bride price? As soon as she said this, the eyes of the Smith parents and George Smith all lit up like stars. 3 more taels? Are you sure? Let's give it a try. Who knows, it might work, Clara Smith said. But you'll need to bring him here. I need to negotiate with him directly. David Smith no longer hesitated. 3 taels of silver. That was enough to buy him plenty of wine. All right, but let's be clear. If he doesn't add those 3 taels, this marriage is off. George Smith, already tempted by the 12 taels, now panicked at the thought of them changing their minds. I'll go fetch him right now. With that, he rushed off in a hurry. In less than half an hour, George Smith had returned with the man. But the man did not come alone. He carried a baby in his arms, with 2 other boys of different ages trailing behind him. The entire family stormed into the Smith household. They came as a whole family. Chapter 002, showcasing culinary skills. Clara Smith had already known beforehand that this man named William Brown had 3 children. The eldest was 8 years old, the second was 5, and the youngest was less than a year old. Among them, the 2 older ones were boys, while the youngest was a girl. Knowing was one thing, but seeing the 3 lively, spirited children in person still left her astonished. What a beautiful family! The father was tall, and though his features weren't conventionally handsome, they carried a unique charm. Especially his deep, bright eyes, straight posture, and refined demeanor that set him apart from the weathered villagers burdened by hard lives. But the 2 boys were even more striking. The eldest, though he wore a stern expression, had incredibly delicate features. Just standing there, he exuded a captivating aura. Clara dared not imagine how many women would swoon if he ever smiled. The younger boy, still childlike in appearance, had a small, adorable face and sparkling eyes that hinted he'd grow up to be just as handsome as his older brother. The youngest, A baby girl cradled in her father's arms hadn't revealed her face yet, but Clara was certain she'd be just as lovely. With children this beautiful, their mother must surely have been a stunning beauty. A man who had such a gorgeous partner and such adorable children. How could he possibly take notice of ordinary women? Clara Smith completely understood William Brown's decision. At the same time, she resolved firmly to marry him. Just looking at his circumstances and these children, she absolutely wouldn't let this opportunity slip away. However, when her parents saw the family of four, their faces darkened simultaneously. This family was too extraordinary. No wonder they had spent 3 months searching without finding anyone suitable. Their own daughter, both dull and unattractive, could never catch their eye. To make matters worse, William Brown coldly stated, "Since I'm choosing a stepmother for my children, they must, of course, be satisfied. That's why I brought all of them here." Clara Smith's parents looked even more displeased. But Clara Smith stepped forward proactively, smiling as she extended her hands. "Is this your youngest daughter? May I hold her for a moment?" William Brown hesitated briefly before handing over the baby. Girl wrapped in a blanket. "Her name is Sophia Miller." "Sophia Miller? Like the hibiscus flower? What a lovely name!" Clara Smith said as she lowered her gaze to the baby, her expression immediately lighting up with amazement. "She's so beautiful, delicate brows, bright eyes. She truly lives up to the name Sophia Miller." Sensing the commotion around her, Sophia Miller, who had been sound asleep, suddenly opened her eyes. Seeing the unfamiliar face before her, the baby pouted, about to cry. Clara Smith quickly patted her back gently, soothing her. "Sophia Miller, be good now. Don't cry, okay?" The baby in the blanket stopped crying instantly, her dark, glistening eyes filled with unshed tears as she stared at Clara intently, looking utterly adorable. Clara had to restrain herself from turning into a doting aunt and smothering the baby with kisses. Seeing his daughter calm in Clara's arms without crying, William Brown gave her a slightly surprised look. Noticing this, Clara Smith smiled up at him. "I'm very good with children. Lily Smith in our family was raised entirely by me." The man glanced at the child standing beside her, clutching the hem of her dress, and nodded. "I see." Hearing this, Clara Smith secretly breathed a sigh of relief. He didn't show any signs of dislike, which meant she had passed the first hurdle. Her older brother, George Smith, however, was solely focused on the 15 taels of silver and paid no attention to anyone's feelings. Having brought them to the house, he hurriedly invited them in. "It's windy outside. Everyone, please come in and sit down. Clara, go get chairs for our guests." "Yes, I understand." Clara Smith hurriedly responded, carrying Sophia Miller in one arm and holding Lily Smith's hand with the other as the three entered the house together. Chairs were brought out, and William Brown sat down to chat with her father and elder brother. Clara Smith stood nearby, continuing to soothe Sophia Miller. After a while of coaxing, Sophia Miller closed her eyes and fell asleep. Clara Smith placed the child on the bed, instructed Lily Smith to sit by and watch over her, then turned and said, "It's getting late. Everyone, stay and have dinner. I'll go cook now. You silly girl. You stay here and chat with them. Let me handle the cooking." Emily Jones quickly interjected. Clara Smith pushed Emily Jones aside. "How about I do it instead?" This man had brought his child to her doorstep, clearly wanting to see how she would perform. Besides taking care of children, what better way to win a man's favor than showcasing her cooking skills? Clara Smith grabbed the basket the man had brought and dashed into the kitchen. Seeing this, Emily Jones could only stomp her feet and hurriedly followed her inside. In the kitchen, Clara Smith uncovered the green cloth draped over the basket and suddenly took a deep breath. Emily Jones peeked in as well and exclaimed, "They sure are generous. Inside the basket were 2 large carp the size of a rolling pin, a block of soft tofu, and a piece of pork belly with a perfect mix of fat and lean, a collection of fine ingredients that rural families rarely got to enjoy throughout the year. Clara Smith became even more certain that this was a test set by the man. As long as she passed this test, success would be within her grasp. She had initially worried about their poverty, with nothing in the kitchen but half a sack of coarse grains and some vegetables from the garden, not much to entertain guests. The food William Brown brought was a lifesaver. She immediately got to work, dividing the 2-pound piece of pork belly into 2 portions. One half she sliced and rendered into half a bowl of lard, which she then used to fry the carp and make a pot of fish soup. The remaining pork she stir-fried with green chili peppers and added some tofu, creating an incredibly fragrant dish of stir-fried pork with green chilies. Next, Clara Smith mashed the tofu and finally chopped the remaining pork into minced meat. She stir-fried the minced meat and tofu together in a pan, creating a dish of minced meat with tofu. Finally, she picked a handful of small white cabbages from the garden. Once the water in the pot boiled, she tossed them in, cooked them just until tender, and served them as a bowl of sweet and fresh vegetable soup without adding any oil or salt. As for the rice, she glanced at the half-sack of coarse grains in the kitchen and suddenly had an idea. She mixed the grains with freshly shelled peas and cooked them together. When the food was ready, Clara Smith quickly laid out 3 savory dishes and 1 bowl of soup on the table. The meal, complete with meat, fish, soup, and vegetables, was so fragrant and visually appealing that it immediately caught everyone's attention in the yard. Chapter 003. Useless at work, but always excelling at creating trouble. David Smith and George Smith stared in astonishment, their throats gulping audibly. George Smith muttered under his breath, "Clara, you're this good at cooking? If I'd known, we should have made you cook every day. The stuff Mom makes is barely edible." Emily Jones, criticized by her son, didn't dare to lose her temper with him and instead glared at Clara Smith. "Clara, you're too wasteful. Using such a big piece of meat and 2 carp all in one meal. When you marry into your husband's family, you can't do this or you'll bankrupt them in no time." Clara Smith acted as if she hadn't heard her nagging. She placed the dishes on the table, and then went to scoop several bowls of rice to serve. At first, the father and sons didn't react much to the dishes, but when they saw the bowls of rice placed before them, they all looked visibly surprised. The bowl of rice in front of her, with vibrant green peas scattered among the golden millet grains, transformed the ordinary dish into something extraordinarily appealing. The bright colors alone made it appetizing even before tasting. The eyes of the 2 boys finally lit up with excitement. Clara Smith noticed their reaction and smiled smugly. In her previous life, aside from painting, her greatest passion had been exploring delicious food. Whenever she encountered a dish that left her in awe, she would make it her mission to recreate it at home. As a result, her friends loved gathering at her place. Now, her cooking skills were the ladder she needed to climb out of the Smith family's mire. As she thought about it, her hands moved swiftly, distributing chopsticks. "All right, the food is ready. Let's eat." William Brown took the chopsticks, but didn't eat right away. Instead, he turned to his 2 sons. "You 2, give it a try." The older boy picked up his chopsticks, grabbed a piece of meat, and put it in his mouth. He chewed with an expressionless face. "How is it, brother?" the younger boy eagerly asked. The older one didn't reply, instead scooping up another bite of rice. Seeing no response, the younger boy decided to grab a piece of tofu with minced meat. He carefully tasted it, swallowed quickly, and then reached for another piece of meat. Delicious. Way better than Dad's cooking," he mumbled through a mouthful of food. William Brown's darkened face suddenly turned red. He looked at his eldest son. "Is it good?" "It's all right," the older boy replied reluctantly, but his chopsticks were already reaching for the fish dish. This boy was clearly saying one thing, but thinking another. Clara Smith silently cursed him in her mind before heading back to the kitchen. In the Smith household, there was a strict rule. Men ate first, while women were not allowed to sit at the same table. Women could only eat leftovers after the men were finished. At this moment, Emily Jones was still standing by, serving the table. Seeing Clara Smith return to the kitchen, Emily quickly followed to check. It turned out Clara was lifting the lid off a pot to bring out a bowl of silky steamed eggs. Emily stormed over angrily and pinched Clara's ear. "You little brat! How many dishes have you already made? And now you're using up the eggs too. I was saving those to sell at the market." Clara quickly turned and ran off. "Mother, look! Except for this bowl of vegetable soup, is there anything else on the table that belongs to our family? Hosting guests and making them eat what they'd brought themselves. What kind of logic is that?" George Smith overheard from outside and nodded repeatedly. "True, true. Clara, let me taste that egg dish. It smells amazing, definitely better than Mother's cooking." He even reached out, trying to grab the bowl. But Clara deftly dodged him. "Brother, these eggs are precious and should be saved for the children. You can eat what's already on the table." With that, she scooped a spoonful of the steamed egg for each of the two boys, and then carried the rest into a room. There, she stirred it to cool it down before feeding it to Sophia Miller, who had just woken up. The steamed eggs Clara made were incredibly soft and smooth, seasoned with just a pinch of salt. She'd also sprinkled some fresh green scallions on top as a finishing touch. The golden yellow of the eggs combined with the bright green of the scallions made the dish visually appealing, and its aroma was irresistible. Sophia Miller smelled the fragrance and immediately opened her mouth with an "ah," swallowing half a spoonful of the silky egg. After finishing one bite, the little girl eagerly opened her mouth for the next. While feeding Sophia, Clara also secretly gave Lily Smith a bite. Lily's cheeks puffed up as she ate, and Sophia, seeing someone else share her food, didn't get upset. She simply waited patiently for Clara to feed her the next bite. Before long, more than half the bowl of steamed eggs had disappeared into the two little ones' bellies. Full and satisfied, Sophia Miller blinked her eyes and gave Clara Smith a sweet smile. The little girl was already adorable, but now with her smile, her eyes curved like crescent moons, and her whole face blooming like a flower, it made Clara Smith feel joyful as well, her eyes crinkling with laughter. "Sophia Miller, how can you be this cute? I adore you so much." Unable to resist, she picked the girl up and planted several kisses on her cheeks. Sophia Miller giggled uncontrollably from the kisses. The child's clear laughter echoed out into the courtyard, catching the attention of the three men eating their meal. They all turned their heads simultaneously to look. Seeing Sophia Miller laughing happily in Clara Smith's arms, the expressions on the three men's faces grew complicated. David Smith, beaming with pride, boasted, "My daughter! I wasn't exaggerating when I said she's incredibly capable. Ever since she learned to walk, she's been taking care of everything: household chores, laundry, sweeping, fetching water, planting vegetables, even working in the fields. There's nothing she can't do." "That's right. My younger sister is so hardworking. She does the work of 3 people all by herself. If I didn't need to get married urgently, we wouldn't have wanted to marry her off so soon. Once she's with your family, I guarantee she'll take care of everything for you. You won't have to lift a finger. Just sit back and wait for meals and drinks to be served." The father and son of the Smith family took turns boasting, clearly proud of their exploitation of Clara Smith. However, these words fell on the ears of the Brown family men, causing all 3 of them to darken in expression. Crash! A loud noise rang out as the eldest Brown son slammed his chopsticks onto the table. "I'm full," he said coldly, his face expressionless. William Brown and the second son of the Brown family also set down their bowls and chopsticks. William Brown stood up. Being tall and imposing, his figure was further emphasized by the setting sun. His shadow stretched long, completely engulfing the father and son of the Smith family. Adding to this, his face was extremely grim at the moment. Combined with the pitch-black shadow, it sent a chill down the spines of the Smith father and son, making them tremble involuntarily. But William Brown merely stared coldly at them for a moment before looking away. "We've finished eating. It's time for us to leave." The Smith father and son could only watch as the three men stood up, leaving their bowls and chopsticks behind, without daring to utter a single word of protest. Chapter 004. Two Faces. Clara Smith, hearing the commotion from inside the house, hurriedly came out carrying Sophia Miller. William Brown reached out to take the child, but as soon as Sophia Miller was in his arms, she burst into loud wails. William Brown looked visibly embarrassed. Clara Smith quickly took the child back, and Sophia Miller instantly stopped crying. William Brown's awkwardness deepened. "All right, how about I take you two back instead? The little one is crying so much, I can't bear to hear it," Clara Smith offered warmly upon seeing the situation. William Brown glanced at Sophia Miller, who was clinging tightly to Clara Smith's neck. Did he have any other choice? And so, Clara Smith carried the child and accompanied the two men back to Brown Village, which was 2 villages away from the Smith village. William Brown had been back for 3 months. His late uncle, who had passed away, was a carpenter in the village. Now, he had taken over his uncle's work and was also living in his old house. The house, though old, was quite spacious. Clara Smith accompanied them all the way to William Brown's doorstep. He extended his hand again. "All right, hand the child over to me." He had no intention of letting her inside the house. Clara Smith raised an eyebrow. "Since I'm already here, I have something to discuss with you." "What is it?" "If you want to marry me, the bride price needs to be increased by 3 taels of silver, making it a total of 15 taels. William Brown's face darkened. "I don't recall saying I wanted to marry you. Didn't you and your family seem quite pleased with me today? Given your family's circumstances, it's rare to find a woman in these 10 miles and 8 villages who would agree to marry into your household. Not to mention one who would wholeheartedly care for your children and be loved by them as well. I'm the only one who fits that description. So, other than me, who else could you marry?" Clara Smith declared confidently. "Then I'd rather not marry." "Humph, don't be ridiculous. You've been frantically asking matchmakers to find you a wife everywhere. Isn't it just because you need someone to take care of Sophia Miller? A rough man like you wouldn't know how to care for a child. Girls are delicate. One mistake and things could go wrong. Moreover, as she grows up, she'll need someone to educate her. These are things only a woman can handle. You clearly understand this, which is why, despite being anxious, you've been so picky and unwilling to settle for just anyone, right?" Clara Smith bluntly exposed him. "All this time, you've been raising 3 kids on your own, playing both father and mother. You must be exhausted, aren't you? Otherwise, why did you come rushing over as soon as my brother invited you? And you even brought so many good things with you. Wasn't it just to test me? Earlier, I demonstrated my skills, and from beginning to end, none of you frowned even once, which proves you were very satisfied. So now, I have every right to negotiate with you." William Brown silently listened to her until she finished speaking. Then, he coldly said, "It seems you've forgotten that the first condition I set for a wife is to be virtuous and gentle. Honestly, at first, I could have pretended to be virtuous and gentle, then revealed my true self after marrying into your home. Do you really want to see that happen? Clara Smith shrugged. The man's gaze turned colder. Clara Smith smiled again. I genuinely want to marry you, which is why I'm being upfront about everything from the start. After all, I've already convinced my parents. As long as you add 3 taels of silver to the bride price, they'll agree to let me marry you. Miss this opportunity, and there won't be another. Think it over carefully. With that, she placed the swaddled baby into his arms and walked away with ease. What? Just as Clara Smith turned around, a loud cry erupted, piercing through the air and making one's eardrums ache. William Brown hurriedly comforted the baby in his arms, then glanced at the figure disappearing into the distance. His expression gradually became unreadable. After much effort, he finally managed to lull his daughter to sleep, drenched in sweat from exhaustion. Tiptoeing out of the room, he found his 2 sons still waiting for him. Looking into the bright eyes of the 2 children, he immediately switched to a respectful demeanor. Young Master Edward, young Master Henry, what do you think of that young lady today? Edward Brown, the eldest son, frowned deeply. I don't like her, and I like her family even less. Henry Brown pouted, but the meals she cooks are delicious. I like them. Edward Brown glared at his younger brother. Is that all you care about? But big brother, you also ate 2 bowls of rice today. Henry Brown raised 2 fingers. Before, at home, you couldn't even finish 1 bowl. Edward Brown's lips twitched, and he turned his face away in frustration. William Brown nodded in agreement. She does cook very well, and takes good care of Sophia Miller. However, her personality is a bit peculiar, as if she's 2 different people. At first, seeing her busily moving around since the moment they met, coupled with the shameless boasting of the Smith father and son, he felt a bit sympathetic toward her. Who would have thought that in just a blink of an eye, this woman would change her demeanor in front of him, arrogantly demanding an increase in the dowry by 3 taels of silver. And she didn't even allow any bargaining. Any pity he had for her vanished like smoke. Humph, growing up in a family like that, it's no surprise she's adept at double-dealing. But if she dares to play tricks in front of us, she's gravely mistaken. If she dares act recklessly, I'll make her regret it. Edward Brown blurted out. William Brown raised an eyebrow. So you've agreed then? Edward Brown froze for a moment before tightly pressing his lips together, saying nothing. Henry Brown clapped his hands cheerfully. I told you so. Big brother clearly likes the meals she cooks too. After a long pause, Edward Brown finally spoke gloomily. After all this time, she's the only one who's barely acceptable. Her bad temper might even be a good thing. I was worried she'd be too timid and end up spoiling Sophia Miller. If you want to marry her, then marry her. She's just a country girl. I don't believe she can cause any trouble for us. Understood, I'll follow your orders. William Brown nodded. I'll go get the money then. Go ahead. Marry her quickly so the household can finally have some peace. I really can't stand Sophia Miller's constant crying anymore. Edward Brown nodded with a seasoned expression. Meanwhile, Clara Smith had just returned home to the Smith village. As soon as she stepped through the door, a gust of wind from a swinging palm came rushing toward her face. Clara Smith quickly stepped aside, causing her mother to miss her target. Emily Jones, who had just been meek and submissive in front of her father, brothers, and the Browns, now glared at her fiercely. You wretched girl, how dare you run away? You've grown bold today, haven't you? Clara Smith was bewildered. What did I do? Mother, at least explain clearly, so I can accept being beaten willingly. You dare ask? Today, the Browns brought so much food, and you cooked it all, not leaving anything for our family. That big piece of meat, you couldn't secretly cut half of it and hide it? Those 2 big fish, you could have cooked just one. How did I end up raising such an ungrateful daughter like you? Chapter 005. A family that favors sons over daughters. As soon as she finished speaking, David Smith from inside the house chimed in angrily. And on top of that, the egg soup was made with our family's eggs, yet I didn't even get a taste. You're not even married yet, and your heart is already with someone else's family. You absolutely deserve a beating. Mother, hit her hard. Make sure she learns her lesson. Exactly. Emily Jones grew angrier as she listened. She grabbed a broom, ready to strike. Clara Smith laughed bitterly in frustration. Our family had nothing decent to serve guests, just 2 eggs, and the rest was all brought by them. That's embarrassing enough, yet you wanted me to hide the guests' food? What would I have served on the table then? I don't care what you served. The bottom line is, they came over, left us nothing, and we lost 2 eggs and a pile of rice. It's all your fault. I bet you secretly ate the eggs yourself. Now, get out there and work. Haul water, weave fabric. Don't even think about resting until you've finished a whole piece. Emily Jones still managed to hit her a few times before angrily shouting. After the men had eaten their fill, they sprawled out on their beds, leaving Emily Jones to reign like a queen in the house, arrogantly ordering around Clara Smith, the only daughter she could boss around. I know. Clara Smith reluctantly picked up the carrying pole and went back to work. After filling the water jars, she returned to her room to weave fabric. Only after finishing a roll of coarse cloth was she allowed by Emily Jones to go to sleep. By then, it was already past midnight. Exhausted from the day, Clara Smith lay on the hard wooden bed, not even wanting to lift a finger. Luckily, this body is accustomed to such intense labor, or I would have collapsed long ago. She muttered to herself before slowly closing her eyes. No way, the original owner of this body might be able to endure this life, but I can't. I have to leave this godforsaken place soon. Mr. Brown, you better come and propose quickly. If you don't, I won't forgive you. Her voice gradually faded as she drifted off into a deep sleep. The next morning, just as the rooster crowed, Clara Smith was rudely awakened by Emily Jones's scolding. She carried the entire family's laundry to the river to wash. After hauling the large basin of clothes back, she arrived just in time to see George Smith shooing Emily Jones out of the kitchen. Mom, step aside. Let Clara cook. Her food tastes better than yours. Emily Jones, unwilling to scold her son, turned her frustration on Clara Smith instead. Clara, go cook. And be honest about it. No sneaking bites, you hear me? Clara Smith's lips twitched. With a little food in the kitchen, what could I possibly sneak? Regardless, only your father and brother are allowed to eat the rice. You're not to touch it. And don't think I've forgotten about the eggs and rice from yesterday. I still need to settle that score with you. Emily Jones was still fuming over Clara Smith's decision to use 2 eggs to make steamed egg custard. Clara Smith couldn't be bothered to argue. She shoved the overflowing laundry basin into Emily Jones's hands. Then I'll trouble you to hang the clothes out to dry for me. With that, she grabbed Lily Smith. Come on, help me start the fire. The Smith family's kitchen was extremely basic, to the point of being bare. There was almost nothing in it. Despite being cornered, Clara Smith measured out a bowl of brown rice, washed it, added 3 ladles of water into the pot, and started the fire to cook porridge. While the rice was boiling, she went out to the garden, picked a handful of greens, washed and chopped them, then added them to the pot. Before taking the pot off the stove, she sprinkled in a pinch of salt and dropped in a piece of leftover pork fat from the previous night's dinner, letting it melt into the porridge. And so, a fragrant pot of vegetable porridge with pork fat was ready. She ladled 2 large bowls of porridge, stir-fried a plate of greens with pork fat, added a dish of pickled radish, and brought everything out. From the moment Clara Smith entered the kitchen, George Smith had been craning his neck, waiting eagerly. As soon as Clara brought out the food, he rushed over and sat properly at the table. Not long after, David Smith woke up, slowly put on his coat, and took his seat at the head of the table. Clara Smith and Emily Jones served the porridge and dishes, and the father and son dug in without hesitation, eating ravenously. This vegetable porridge is delicious. The stir-fried greens are great too. Much better than Mom's cooking. With no guests around, George Smith ate voraciously, piling food into his bowl without any regard for his father. Of course, David Smith wasn't any better than his son. The father and son ate like a storm, each devouring 2 bowls of porridge, completely polishing off the pot. Only after letting out a loud burp did they put their bowls and chopsticks down. Hayes, if I had known Clara's cooking was this good, I would have made her cook for our family every day, George Smith said with a tone of regret. David Smith slapped his thigh with a loud smack. Well, it's not too late to know now. Clara, even if you get married in the future, you must remember to come back and cook for us, understood? Yes, I understand, Clara Smith replied obediently. But inside, she sneered, dream on. Once I leave this hellhole, I'll make sure to run as far away as possible. The best outcome would be never seeing any of you again for the rest of my life. After eating their fill, David Smith and his father rubbed their bellies and waddled back to their rooms to lie down. They had eaten too much, their stomachs uncomfortably bloated, yet they were too lazy to move around to help digest the food, so they just sprawled there. This was a routine that repeated year-round. Emily Jones had never uttered a word of complaint. On the contrary, she now hurried Clara Smith along, saying, Quickly bring a glass of water for your father and brother. Make sure they don't get thirsty. Clara Smith had just brought water to her father and her so-called brother when Emily Jones shouted at her, What are you standing there for? Hurry up and eat. After eating, we're heading to the fields to work. It's already spring planting season. Look at the 3rd uncles, 4th uncles, and 5th uncles' families. They've already planted more than half of their seedlings, and our family is just starting. It's all because you're lazy. Clearly, it was because she spoiled her husband and son too much, unwilling to let them lift a finger. A household without any real laborers, relying only on the 2 of us women. Finishing planting the seedlings before summer would already be a miracle, Clara Smith thought to herself. Of course, she knew that if she spoke up, Emily Jones would beat and scold her. Worse, even the bedridden David Smith and his son would likely crawl out of bed to join in. The memories of such incidents in the original owner's mind were countless, with reasons for the beatings as varied as they were absurd, enough to continually challenge her understanding. Thus, Clara Smith obediently kept her mouth shut and continued to endure. She only needed to endure for a few more days, just until the Brown family came to propose marriage. She firmly believed he would come. Chapter 006. He comes to propose. Breakfast for the mother and daughter consisted of nothing more than a simple bowl of bran porridge and a small plate of dried radish. Clara Smith looked at it, her appetite non-existent. But to keep her body functioning, she forced herself to swallow the porridge, then picked up Lily Smith from the cradle. Lily Smith was almost 2 years old, but remained tiny and frail, not much bigger than Sophia Miller from the Brown family. Looking at her sickly little sister, Clara Smith's heart filled with sorrow. Only when cradled in Clara Smith's arms did Lily Smith resemble a child at all. At this moment, the little girl curled up in Clara's embrace, her small hand clutching her sleeve. Sister hungry? I know. Sister will get some porridge for you, Clara Smith gently reassured her, carrying Lily Smith into the kitchen. But instead of heading to the stove, she quietly retrieved a small bowl from the cupboard. Inside it was a surprise, a bowl of green vegetable porridge. Earlier, Before serving David Smith and his son, she had secretly scooped out half a bowl and hidden it away. By now, the porridge had cooled slightly. Clara Smith spooned it carefully, feeding it to Lily Smith. Lily Smith, who had never tasted such delicious porridge before, eagerly took a bite and quickly grabbed the spoon to feed herself. In just moments, the entire bowl of porridge was gone. Still unsatisfied, Lily Smith picked up the bowl again and licked it clean, even finishing the broth at the bottom. Finally, the bowl in her hands was spotless, shining as if it had just been washed. "Big sister, the porridge is so delicious. I want to eat it again in the future." Holding the empty bowl, Lily Smith looked up at her with wide, hopeful eyes. Seeing this, Clara Smith felt her heart soften. She quickly stroked her younger sister's soft hair. "Don't worry, once your big sister accomplishes something, I'll take you to eat all the delicacies in the world. This porridge is nothing compared to those." "Porridge? You dared to give that brat porridge to eat?" Just as she finished speaking, Emily Jones's loud voice boomed from the doorway. Frightened, Lily Smith quickly burrowed into Clara Smith's arms. Clara Smith shook her head hastily. "You misheard, Mother. Didn't the porridge already go to Father and Brother? I only gave Lily Smith some bran porridge. As if I'd believe you." Emily Jones stormed in, grabbed the empty bowl from the stove, sniffed it, and then stuck her head into the cupboard to take a few more whiffs. Her face darkened immediately. Snatching the fire tongs by the stove, she charged at the two sisters. "I'll beat you two worthless girls to death. How dare you eat white porridge? Spit it out right now." Just as the fire tongs were about to strike, Clara Smith grabbed Lily Smith and bolted. Emily Jones wasn't about to let them off, chasing after them with the tongs in hand and spewing curses non-stop. Clara Smith dashed out of the kitchen and headed straight for the front door. She knew full well that if they stayed, David Smith and his son would soon join in, turning it into a 3-against-2 brawl. She and Lily Smith would stand no chance. The only option was to run outside and create a commotion to draw the villagers' attention. While they wouldn't avoid a beating in the end, at least with others intervening, David Smith and his son might go easier on them. Without hesitation, she slipped out the front door of the Smith household and ran straight outside. Unexpectedly, just as she carried Lily Smith out the door, she bumped into something hard. "Ouch!" Clara Smith cried out in pain, staggering and nearly falling. Luckily, at that moment, a strong arm quickly wrapped around her waist, steadying her and helping her regain her balance. Once she was steady, Clara Smith immediately looked down at Lily Smith in her arms. "Lily Smith, are you okay? Did you get hurt?" Lily Smith shook her head, her wide eyes filled with fear. "Big sister, they're coming." The small finger pointed toward the door, and sure enough, Emily Jones and David Smith hurriedly ran out one after another. However, after stepping outside, they didn't cause any trouble but instead immediately shifted their fierce expressions into flattering smiles. "Oh, why is Mrs. Watson here? And the Brown family too? Why didn't you send someone to notify us in advance? We've just finished breakfast." Guests arriving at their house, and their first reaction was to complain about not being notified beforehand. Clara Smith cursed inwardly. But wait, the Browns? William Brown? Suddenly realizing something, Clara Smith quickly looked up and discovered that the person who had just helped her steady herself by holding her waist was none other than William Brown. Though this man still wore the same cold and distant expression as the last time they met, at least his presence alone was enough to scare her so-called adoptive parents. This was undoubtedly a good thing. At least this would save her from a beating, and Lily Smith could enjoy her bowl of vegetable porridge in peace. And then there was Mrs. Watson, smiling brightly beside him. Clara's eyes lit up. "Are you here to propose marriage? Have you prepared the 15 taels of silver for the bride price? This girl truly was. Every time he felt a pang of sympathy for her, she would do something to extinguish any trace of tenderness he might have had. William Brown coldly let go of her. Only then did Clara Smith realize that the man's arm had still been around her waist. Mrs. Watson covered her mouth, laughing softly. "Clara, you shameless girl! Even if we really came to propose marriage, you shouldn't just blurt it out like that. That's not something a proper young lady should ask." Hearing this, the entire Smith family of 3 was stunned. George Smith was so overwhelmed that he stuttered. Really? Are you truly willing to spend 15 taels of silver to marry my younger sister?" William Brown, his face expressionless, pulled out a piece of green cloth from his chest. Unfolding it, it revealed 2 gleaming silver ingots, one large and one small. "Here are 15 taels of silver. I will marry your daughter." Mrs. Watson chuckled and chimed in. "William is truly sincere. After meeting Clara yesterday, he couldn't stop thinking about her. Isn't that right? Early this morning, he came to my house, asking me to arrange the proposal. And not only that, but he even added 3 extra taels to the bride price, making it a total of 15 taels. Oh my, I've been matchmaking in this village for years, and I've never seen anyone offer such a high bride price for their daughter. Clara is the first. Do you know what this means? It means William genuinely cherishes her. Clara marrying him will bring her a lifetime of happiness." As Mrs. Watson's words became more and more exaggerated, William Brown interrupted in a deep voice. "I added those 3 extra taels with a condition. If your daughter marries me, aside from the conditions I've already set, she must adhere to one more. Except during holidays, none of you are allowed to visit my house to see her. Once she marries into the Brown family, she is part of my family, and she is not to involve herself in any matters concerning the Smith family." Chapter 007. The Marriage Proposal. All right. Whatever you say, I'll listen. I'll do as you wish. George Smith could only see the gleaming 15 taels of silver. Looking at such a large sum of money, he imagined his dream girl, Daisy Wilson, happily marrying him. With this amount, forget these conditions, add 100 more, and he wouldn't hesitate to agree. David Smith, too, was already captivated by the money and quickly nodded in agreement. Seeing her husband and son both agree, Emily Jones naturally had no objections. And so, the marriage was settled just like that. After writing the marriage contract and exchanging the watchman's plaque under the matchmaker's witness, David Smith carefully held the 15 taels of silver in his hands, squinting in satisfaction. "Son-in-law, there's something I need to make clear to you first." With the money in hand, he started acting like a father-in-law. William Brown's eyes momentarily turned cold, but he patiently nodded. "Yes, father. Our family is poor. The bride price you've given will be saved for Clara's elder brother's wedding. So, we're not planning to hold a wedding banquet for her. Whenever you want to take her home, just come and pick her up." "Is that so?" "Perfect timing. My family doesn't have elders to arrange a wedding either, and I've been worrying about how to handle it. Since you've said so, I'll keep it simple as well. Just invite the villagers to witness it. I remember 3 days from now is an auspicious day. Let's set the wedding for then, and I'll come to fetch her." William Brown nodded. His gaze instinctively flicked to Clara Smith sitting quietly in the corner, appearing obedient. Unfortunately, he knew all too well she wasn't the least bit docile. However, in the Smith household, Clara Smith seemed to suppress all her temper, sitting quietly without showing any dissatisfaction about marrying off without a proper wedding. In truth, Clara Smith was seething with rage inside. David Smith and William Brown, neither of them was worth anything. Neither treated her as a person. 2 despicable men. Luckily, she had never considered David Smith her real father nor intended to spend her life with William Brown. Otherwise, hearing their words would have made her spit blood. But for now, her goal was to leave the Smith household smoothly. With only 3 days left to achieve her objective, she didn't want any complications, so she gritted her teeth and endured. "All right, as you say." To William Brown's words, the entire Smith family had no objections. After all, the money was already in their hands, and the daughter was now someone else's family member. Clara Smith's life, death, or dignity had nothing to do with them anymore. Having the money was all that mattered. "Then I'll take my leave. In 3 days, I'll come to fetch the bride." With just a few words, the marriage arrangement was finalized. William Brown took the watchman's plaque and left. After seeing William Brown and the matchmaker off, David Smith and George Smith were overjoyed. 15 taels. This fool actually gave the full amount. "My daughter is truly talented. I told her to add 3 more taels, and she added them right away." David Smith lifted the 2 silver ingots to admire them, greed gleaming in his eyes. "Clara, you did well. Keep it up in the future. Even after marrying into the Brown family, you must bring back more money for our family. Your brother and I are counting on you for the rest of our lives." Clara Smith's lips twitched slightly. Emily Jones whispered, "But the young man from the Brown family just said we shouldn't interact with Clara too much anymore." "Humph, who cares about him? He says that now, but later, if I want to visit my daughter, can he really stop me? She's my biological daughter. I raised her to this age. Even if she marries into the Brown family, she is still my daughter. He can't deny that." David Smith shouted shamelessly, his neck veins bulging. George Smith nodded repeatedly. "Father's right. That guy added 3 taels so readily. He must have plenty of money left. How many mouths does his family have to feed? How much could they spend in a year? We're helping them spend it, so they don't have to worry about outsiders from the Brown family coming to beg for money. Better the money stays in our family than gets borrowed by someone else." "Exactly. We're doing him a favor." The marriage proposal had just been made, yet this father and son duo already treated the Brown family's assets as their own. Hearing this, Emily Jones nodded knowingly. "You're absolutely right." Clara Smith was so furious she nearly rolled her eyes. How did she end up in such a shameless family? Still, thinking back to her 2 encounters with William Brown, especially earlier when she bumped into his chest outside, his chest was solid. Her shoulder blades still ached from the impact. Based on her past life experiences, she could affirm that this man, despite wearing loose clothing, undoubtedly had a great physique. Forget about abs, his chest muscles were definitely firm. A man who could train his body like that, was he someone you could mess with so easily? Only her naive parents and brother thought he was just a poor, rustic carpenter they could manipulate at will. Humph, there will come a time when they'll cry about it. Thinking of this, a faint smile curved her lips. She couldn't wait to witness that day. Since both sides had agreed to the marriage, 3 days later, matchmaker Watson came with William Brown to escort the bride. The Smith family parents hurriedly packed Clara Smith off and sent her away. William Brown led a small donkey to take her to the Brown household. The bride and groom held a simple wedding ceremony in the main hall, and the marriage was considered complete. As soon as she stepped into the bridal chamber, a bundle of swaddling cloth was thrust into her arms. "Quick, make her stop crying! My head is about to explode from all the noise." Clara Smith looked at the baby, Sophia Miller, in her arms, then at Edward Brown, who had already turned and walked away. Her lips twitched. So my days of being a wet nurse start now. But Sophia Miller was indeed adorable. In just a few days, the little girl had become even more radiant and lovely. As Clara gazed at the baby's tiny face, her resentment quickly melted away. She gently comforted Sophia Miller with soft words, and soon the little girl stopped crying. Having cried for a long time before Clara's arrival, Sophia was now exhausted. Once she stopped crying, she yawned widely, her eyelids drooping as she quickly fell asleep in Clara's arms. Even in her sleep, Sophia Miller's tiny hand clung tightly to Clara Smith's sleeve, refusing to let go. The wedding arrangements for the Brown family were handled with the help of their neighbor, Becca Young. Now, seeing Clara Smith successfully calming Sophia Miller, Becca laughed so hard that her face was full of wrinkles. Clara really has a way with her. That Sophia Miller is such a fiery child. We usually spend hours trying to soothe her without success. But as soon as you stepped in, you managed to lull her to sleep. It seems you're truly destined to be William's wife. Now I can rest assured. I should head home and get back to work. Wait, don't leave so quickly. At least tell me about the situation at home. Clara Smith hurriedly called out in a low voice, but Becca Young was already gone in a flash, disappearing from sight in no time. Clara Smith felt annoyed. Does she dislike me that much? I've just joined this family, and I clearly haven't offended her in any way. Chapter 008. Discovering something unusual while she was busy speculating about the reasons, William Brown returned after seeing off the guests. True to his word, even though there was a wedding celebration, he didn't bother hosting a feast. He merely bought a few pounds of sunflower seeds and peanuts, giving each guest a small handful. He also hadn't prepared any new clothes for the occasion, still wearing the same faded cotton outfit he had worn when he visited the Smith family for the matchmaking meeting. This marriage had just begun, yet he was already displaying his indifference toward her. It made sense. With such an attitude from him, how could others possibly value her? Clara Smith felt even more fortunate that she hadn't placed any expectations on this marriage from the start. Otherwise, she would have been infuriated. But Becca Young's earlier behavior was truly unreasonable, and Clara couldn't shake off the feeling that there was more to it. Now that William Brown was here, she decided to ask directly, "What's the deal with Becca Young? Did you offend her in the past?" "Not at all. When I first mentioned wanting to find a wife, she wanted to match me with her niece from her mother's side. But after I laid out my conditions, her family immediately turned sour, scolded me, and even lashed out at her. She was upset with me for a few days, but I apologized. Since then, we've been on good terms." William Brown answered honestly. "Ah, I see. Now I understand." Clara Smith nodded. "Understand what?" "Understand that Becca Young doesn't like me because she thinks I stole a good match away from her niece." William Brown's face instantly darkened. "You've just arrived and are already trying to sow discord? Becca Young is very kind. Our family has relied on her help a lot over the past few months. Her niece also came to assist a few times. She's a good girl, so don't tarnish her reputation." "Oh, I see. Got it. I won't speak ill of Becca Young's niece anymore." Clara Smith immediately changed her tone, no longer showing displeasure. Thinking about the 15 taels of silver used to redeem herself, she resolved to serve him in any way he wished until the debt was repaid. Seeing her so obedient, William Brown felt even more irritated. He suddenly realized that her lively demeanor from earlier was more pleasing to the eye. William Brown coldly said, "I already know your temperament. No need to pretend to be obedient to deceive me. If you weren't being difficult, I'd find it unsettling." Clara Smith stuck out her tongue. "Aw, you caught me again. Fine, I won't pretend any more." See? Now she looked much more normal. William Brown let out a sigh of relief, but his expression remained grim. "But don't get too pleased with yourself just yet. I still have a few things to make clear to you." "All right, go ahead," she replied. "That day, you were right. I agreed to marry you only to find someone to take care of the children and educate Sophia Miller. So, as long as you behave and do your part well, you won't lack anything you deserve. At the very least, in my house, you'll have enough to eat and wear, and I won't mistreat you. But if you're dishonest and keep causing trouble, I won't be lenient. Understood? I also promise you this, during my time as your wife, I will fulfill my duties as both a wife and a stepmother, and I will ensure that you are never embarrassed because of me. Clara Smith actually appreciated his straightforward attitude. She immediately expressed her stance clearly. Seeing her respond so quickly, even looking happy to agree, William Brown suddenly felt puzzled and uneasy. You'd better truly mean that. Don't worry. You saved me from that hellhole. I haven't even thanked you properly yet. Why would I ruin my own future and provoke your anger? Clara Smith said with a wave of her hand, laughing. Even if she were to anger him one day, it would have to wait until she had firmly established herself outside, with enough money in hand to start her own life. William Brown discovered the thoughts of the woman before him were far deeper than he had imagined. He had deliberately provoked her, yet she remained calm and composed in her response. Could such shrewdness really belong to a girl from a rural village? But clearly, he had sent people to investigate. Clara Smith was indeed born and raised in the Smith village. Moreover, her father was a good-for-nothing, doing nothing at home, spending all his time drinking, gambling, and abusing his wife. Her mother favored sons over daughters, spoiling the boys while treating the girls like worthless trash. She lived a life in the Smith village that was worse than that of pigs and dogs, timid and shy. When she learned her parents had arranged several families for her to marry for money, she could only run to the riverbank to cry, crying so much that she fell into the river. Fortunately, someone discovered her and rescued her in time, but she remained dazed and blank. But thinking back to the Clara Smith he had met, where was she foolish or timid? Apart from her slightly unconventional demeanor, her courage far surpassed that of any other woman he had met before. Where exactly was the problem? Or was this woman simply an exceptional actress? While he was still pondering the possibilities, Clara Smith had already placed the sleeping Sophia Miller onto the bed. You stay here and watch over Sophia Miller. It's still early. I'll tidy up the house a bit. Taking someone's money and doing their work. This principle she understood. Watching her stride out, William Brown pressed his lips into a thin line. A moment later, his two brothers, Edward Brown and Henry Brown, arrived. What's going on? He quickly snapped out of his thoughts. Edward Brown smirked. She said she wanted to clean the house, wash the bedding, and kicked us out. Listening carefully, sure enough, there were sounds coming from the adjacent room. Good, at least she knows her place. William Brown nodded. For now, she seems to have some sense. That's good. It looks like the surprise I prepared won't be needed. Edward Brown continued. William Brown raised an eyebrow. What did you prepare? Nothing much. My brother and I caught a snake, planning to release it to scare her a bit. But seeing how obediently she started working as soon as she entered, I let the snake go. Hearing this, William Brown's face darkened. Have you forgotten your status? How could you behave like the mischievous children in the village? Edward Brown's smile instantly faded under the reprimand. Aren't I just like a village child now? Father always told me to quickly integrate with them. Now that I've done it, Father scolds me again? That's a different matter. You are? I'm nothing at all now. I'm just the son of a village carpenter named Edward Brown. Edward Brown threw out those words and stormed off in anger. Henry Brown was left stunned in place, intimidated by his cold demeanor. Father, brother. It's all right, he's in a bad mood. Just let him have some time alone, William Brown said, his voice tinged with helplessness. Oh! Henry Brown nodded blankly, still not fully recovered. Clara Smith was making the bed when the boy suddenly barged in. "Get out." The boy pointed at the door, snapping at her in a low voice. Chapter 009. Argument. Clara Smith raised an eyebrow. The father and son are arguing, and now I, an outsider, am getting dragged into this? Doesn't seem quite right, does it? It wasn't that she wanted to eavesdrop. It was just that the house was a bit small, and their voices, slightly raised, carried clearly into her room. She couldn't help but hear it. Edward Brown shot her a cold glare. "Don't make me say it a third time. Get out." For some reason, the boy's icy gaze sent a shiver down Clara's spine, a chill running unmistakably along her back. This kid's stare was truly terrifying. Only 8 years old, and he already had such a frightening look in his eyes. But Clara Smith wasn't one to back down. She planted her hands on her hips. "I'm actually waiting for you to say it a third time. Go on, if you dare." Being a stepmother? Sure, she accepted that. But a stepmother was still a person and had her own rights too. Besides, this little brat was already trying to boss her around from the start. If she gave in now, no one in this house would respect her in the future. After all, she was their stepmother now. "You?" Edward Brown glared at her. "Women and petty people are the hardest to deal with." With that angry remark, the boy stormed out of the room and ran straight outside. The corners of Clara Smith's lips curled up slightly. Quite the temper, huh? But at least he knows how to hold back and not take his anger out on others. Seems like his mother did a decent job raising him. As Edward Brown stormed off, William Brown arrived. "Who gave you the right to send him out?" he demanded harshly as soon as he stepped through the door. "You did," Clara Smith replied. "Say that again?" "Who?" "You, as his father. If you hadn't started lecturing him, he wouldn't have gotten so angry and taken it out on everyone around him. So the one truly at fault here is you." William Brown's face darkened. "Already showing your true colors right after moving in? Did you forget what I told you? I promised that after marrying into this family, I'd handle the cooking and cleaning, and I've done just that," Clara Smith retorted. "Besides, what did I do that was so wrong? I'm your lawfully wedded wife. On our wedding day, you argued with your son, and now you're arguing with me. So tell me, who's really at fault here? Shall we go to the clan leader and settle this? Do you think I won't send you back to your parents' house right this instant? Even if you chase me away, I won't return the 15 taels of silver." "You?" "Wah!" The heavy atmosphere in the courtyard affected Sophia Miller, who was sleeping in the next room. The sensitive child immediately burst into tears. Clara Smith hurriedly ran in to pick up the baby, gently soothing her. Then she pointed at Sophia Miller, lying on the bed with teary eyes before drifting back to sleep. "Are you sure you want to send me away? Have you mentally prepared yourself to comfort Sophia Miller when I'm gone? Have you made up your mind to wait another 6 months to find someone suitable to care for her?" William Brown was at a loss for words. "Just focus on your own work." He sat down on the edge of the bed, leaving her only the back of his head. "As if I'm wasting my time here because I want to." Clara Smith huffed angrily, then walked out to continue tidying up the house. The house without a female master was truly a mess beyond tolerance. Clara Smith spent half a day just tidying up their chaotic belongings. After a long bout of busyness, the sky had already turned to dusk. Clara Smith was so hungry that her stomach growled loudly. Over the past few days, the family of 3, David Smith, took advantage of the remaining time to exploit her to the fullest. Emily Jones even acted as if she were guarding against a thief, monitoring her all day, not allowing her to eat an extra bite. Since this morning, she hadn't even had a sip of water before being kicked out of the Smith household. Fortunately, This body had grown accustomed to such days, otherwise she feared she would have fainted from hunger by now. But even so, her strength was nearing its limit. Clara Smith decided to cook. She slipped into the kitchen of the Brown family and finally smiled for the first time that day. This kitchen was far better than the one in the Smith household. There were pots and pans aplenty, a full water jar, a sack of rice, half a bag of flour, a large piece of smoked meat hanging from the ceiling, and a basket of fresh vegetables outside the door. There were even some spring bamboo shoots, and next to them, a few quail eggs. The room was brimming with food, and just looking at it filled her with hope for life. Her stomach, which had gone too long without a proper meal, growled once more. She quickly cut a piece of smoked meat, peeled and washed the spring bamboo shoots, sliced them, blanched them in boiling water, and stir-fried them with the smoked meat. She cracked all the quail eggs, mixed them with tender spring leaves, and made a fragrant spring egg omelet. She stir-fried a dish of white cabbage, cooked a pot of crispy rice, and even took special care to make a bowl of dough soup with the flour for Sophia Miller. Once everything was ready, she stood at the kitchen door and called out, "Time to eat!" Immediately, the second son, Henry Brown, came running happily. Then William Brown arrived as well. Only Edward Brown was still nowhere to be seen. "Where's Edward?" Clara Smith asked urgently. Henry Brown pointed toward the main door. "Big brother is still daydreaming at the entrance." It turned out the boy had run out of the house, but only made it as far as the main door, where he sat in a daze until now. Clara Smith found it incredibly amusing. "And you didn't call him in for dinner?" "I did, but he refused. He said he wouldn't eat any more." "How can that be?" "He's still a child, at the age where he needs to eat well and grow." "That won't do. I'll go call him in." Just as Clara Smith was about to head out, William Brown sternly ordered, "Sit down." Clara Smith immediately sat down with a thud. Then she suddenly snapped out of it. Why did I just listen to him like that? But the roar from that guy just now was so powerful, no less intense than Edward's gaze earlier. If this family really had been in the timber business elsewhere before, their operations must have been massive. William Brown spoke again. "If he wants to sit out there sulking, let him. Skipping one meal isn't going to kill anyone." With that, he picked up his chopsticks. "Let's eat." Henry Brown quickly grabbed his chopsticks and started eating. Seeing this, Clara Smith shrugged and picked up her chopsticks as well. The conflict between father and son wasn't something she, an outsider, needed to meddle in. Her stomach was growling with hunger. She truly didn't have the energy to worry about other people's business. The three of them sat around the table, quietly finishing 2 bowls of rice. Clara Smith then carried Sophia Miller, who had just woken up, and fed her some porridge. Afterward, Clara took Sophia back to the room and saw William Brown sitting on a chair, staring intently at the front door. Seeing this, Clara Smith smirked slightly. "You talk tough, but deep down you're still worried about Edward, aren't you? So what now? Need my help?" Chapter 010. The 3 Rules Agreement. William Brown suddenly turned sharply. "You know how to help? Of course, I can convince him to come inside and even get him to eat. But if I manage to do that, shouldn't you show me a little something in return?" Clara Smith said with a mischievous smile. "What kind of gesture are you expecting from me?" "It's very simple. Considering the disrespectful attitude you and your son showed me today, I believe we need to establish some ground rules." "Ground rules?" "Exactly. Whether at home or outside, you both must respect me. Especially in public, you must maintain my dignity. Even though you spent 15 taels of silver to bring me here as a nanny, my current status is still your wife and the mother of your 3 children. If you want me to wholeheartedly serve and treat you well, you absolutely must adhere to this." A glimmer of light flashed in William Brown's eyes before fading. Why do I feel like, ever since you demanded an extra 3 taels of silver for the bride price, you've been preparing these rules to spring on me? So what if I have? Anyway, now may I ask, my dear husband, what do you think of my proposal? Clara Smith asked with a bright smile. Bring Edward in here first. No problem. Just wait and see. Clara Smith nodded enthusiastically and headed to the door. In less than half a minute, Edward Brown stormed into the room, visibly upset. Clara Smith quickly went to the kitchen, scooped a bowl of rice, and added some leftover dishes into another bowl before handing them to the boy. Surprisingly, Edward Brown did not refuse. Seeing this, William Brown looked incredulous. How did you manage that? Agree to the 3 rules we just discussed, and I'll tell you, Clara Smith replied. Fine, I agree. William Brown nodded without hesitation. The demands she made were not unreasonable. He could comply. Besides, he understood that even if he refused, this woman would find a way to make them follow her rules anyway. He didn't have the energy to argue with her all day. Clara Smith then explained. It's actually very simple. I told him that if he continued to stay outside, I'd drag him around the entire village and call him my son in front of everyone. He didn't like that, so he had no choice but to come inside. The corners of William Brown's mouth twitched slightly. Edward and Henry are still young boys and easily embarrassed. Don't push them too hard. Don't worry, I know my limits. Besides, I only said that to scare him a little. I wouldn't actually force anyone into anything. I don't want to be anyone's stepmother for real. This method was just for this time. Next time, I'll come up with something else. Clara Smith replied quickly. William Brown's mouth twitched again. He decided he didn't want to continue this conversation any longer. Mrs. Clara Smith had achieved her goal, so she didn't want to say much to him. She went straight to the kitchen to clean the bowls and chopsticks, then scooped hot water from the pot. All right, everyone, go take a bath. Clean yourselves up and have a good night's sleep. At the Smith household, Emily Jones kept a constant watch over her like a thief. She wouldn't let Clara eat an extra bite of food, nor would she allow her to skip even the smallest task. Clara was busy all day, sweating as if she were bathing, yet Emily Jones wouldn't let her heat water for a bath, claiming it wasted firewood. Good heavens, how uncomfortable she felt. Today, while cooking at the Brown household, Clara noticed their storage was packed with firewood. She made an immediate decision. She would heat water for a bath. And she did just that. William Brown had no objections. In fact, he even instructed. Edward and his sister each get their own tub of water. They don't share bath water with anyone. No problem. Clara Smith readily agreed. Earlier, when Clara entered the kitchen, she had noticed a pile of large and small wooden tubs stacked there. A quick count revealed that each member of the Brown family must have had several tubs of their own. As expected of people from the city, their lifestyle was indeed meticulous. After Clara scooped the water, William Brown carried it into the room for the 2 children. Clara also prepared a tub of water for herself and Sophia Miller. Edward Brown, though only 8 years old, was quite stubborn. Whether eating or bathing, he insisted on doing everything himself, and William Brown let him be. After bathing his younger son, William Brown quickly wiped himself clean. As he carried the basin of water past Edward Brown, he suddenly stopped. Edward Brown noticed this, and his small face, already tense, grew even stiffer. William Brown placed the basin down and knelt on one knee before Edward Brown. Young master, today I have overstepped. I sincerely apologize to you. Edward Brown pursed his lips. All right, I understand. You were only anxious to conceal our identities. I get it. This matter is over now. Don't bring it up again in the future. Yes, as you command. William Brown let out a sigh of relief. He stood up, ready to leave, but then heard Edward Brown call out, "Wait! Young master, do you have further instructions? That woman, she is a bit arrogant, but at least her intentions aren't bad. Let her stay for a few more days to observe. And don't argue with her any more. At the very least, she's quite good at household chores." "Yes, I understand." William Brown finally left. Edward Brown waited until the door closed before slowly relaxing his expression. He then turned to look at the half-eaten meal left on the table and slowly picked up his chopsticks. Taking a bite, he frowned. "It's completely cold, but the taste is decent enough. I might as well eat it." And the result of just eating? "Brother, why did you finish everything?" It wasn't until he heard Henry Brown's exclamation that Edward Brown snapped out of his thoughts and realized that all the dishes in front of him were now empty. He immediately put on a stern face. "This was mine to begin with. Whether I finish it or not has nothing to do with you. But I was waiting for you to leave some for me." Henry Brown swallowed hard. "She really cooks well." Edward Brown smirked slightly and cleared the boy's plate. "You already ate so much earlier that your belly was full. If you eat more now, you'll turn into a little ball. Come on, time to brush your teeth." With that, he pulled Henry Brown along, and the two brothers carried the empty dishes back to the kitchen. Meanwhile, William Brown returned to his room only to see Clara Smith playing with Sophia Miller on the bed. The two, one adult and one child, lay on the bed together. Their hair, still slightly damp, fell behind their necks as they laughed and played joyfully. Somehow, Clara Smith managed to make Sophia Miller laugh uncontrollably, snuggling into her embrace. Clara Smith held Sophia Miller tightly, occasionally kissing the little girl's cheeks with endless affection. They seemed so close, just like a real mother and daughter. However, the moment Clara Smith saw William Brown appear at the door, the radiant smile on her face vanished. "Oh, why are you back?" she asked, feigning surprise. Her undisguised look of disdain nearly made William Brown turn and leave. Chapter 011. Finally, it feels a bit like a home. "Do I need to remind you? Today is our wedding day, and tonight is our wedding night," William Brown said coldly. Clara Smith sighed. "If you hadn't mentioned it, I would have completely forgotten." The man's face darkened. "Are you blaming me?" "He's angry now." Clara Smith quickly shook her head. "Husband, I'm sorry, it's my fault. So, should we consummate the marriage now?" She blinked her eyes, her gaze bright as she looked at the man in front of her, as if signaling that the moment he nodded, she would immediately undress and comply with him. William Brown turned his face away, his expression full of disdain. "I've already told you I won't let you bear children anymore, so of course I must eliminate any chance of you getting pregnant. Forget about consummating the marriage." Perfect! She was right. This was exactly his intention. This move of hers had worked. Clara Smith let out a sigh of relief. She quickly nodded obediently. "I understand. And don't even think about going out and complaining. Who do you think would believe such a thing? Moreover, if you dare to speak, I have plenty of ways to deal with you." The man added harshly, "If it were some naive, inexperienced village girl, she would have been scared out of her wits by his cold demeanor." But Clara Smith cheerfully nodded even more. "I understand. I promise I won't say a word." On a day as great as this, she was overjoyed. Why would she complain? Unless she had lost her mind. Seeing her agree so readily, William Brown narrowed his eyes. "Don't think you can deceive me now and scheme later. I won't give you the chance." Does he ever stop talking? She had only gone along with his words a little, yet he wouldn't stop lecturing her? Clara Smith yawned and showed her impatience. "Yes, my dear husband, I remember everything. I promise to follow your instructions, and not cross any lines. Can we sleep now? In truth, he hadn't finished speaking. To intimidate her, William Brown had prepared a whole arsenal of harsh words. But before he could even get through a few sentences, Clara Smith had already surrendered. He was left speechless, feeling utterly frustrated. Clara Smith had already bent down to soothe Sophia Miller to sleep. Once the child was sound asleep, she carried her and placed her in the middle of the bed, then lay on the inside. "Husband, can we sleep like this tonight? Sophia is still young, and if she sleeps in the middle, we can both keep an eye on her. What do you think?" This arrangement suited him perfectly. He had no desire to touch her anyway. So, despite his inner frustration, William Brown couldn't find anything to criticize. He frowned and nodded. Ah, she was right again. Now completely at ease, Clara Smith let out a big yawn. "All right then, let's sleep. It's late." She immediately laid down and closed her eyes. A moment later, the sound of steady, slightly deep breathing arose. Had she really fallen asleep already? William Brown stared wide-eyed at the woman sleeping soundly before him, a whirl of mixed emotions churning inside him. This was clearly the outcome he had been hoping for. But why, when everything unfolded perfectly according to plan, did he feel so unsettled? The reason for it all lay with the woman in front of him. She was too obedient, too perceptive. It was as if she could read his mind, leaving him feeling thoroughly uncomfortable. He stood at the edge of the bed, staring intently at Clara Smith as she slept soundly for a long while, before finally letting out a helpless sigh. "Keep pretending. Let's see how long you can keep this up. When it comes to time and patience, I'm not lacking." He refused to believe she was truly this compliant. After all, his previous interactions with her had shown she was an incredibly shrewd individual. She must have her own motives for acting this way. But for now, he still couldn't figure it out. Forget it, sleep. After a long, exhausting day, he was utterly drained. Thinking any more about it might just wear him out completely. He decisively gave up, figuring there were plenty of days ahead. He, too, collapsed onto the bed, pulled the blanket over himself, and lay down. However, having a woman suddenly sharing the bed made him feel somewhat uneasy. As a result, he tossed and turned all night, only managing to fall asleep in the middle of the night. That night, Clara Smith slept deeply. But early the next morning, when the village rooster began to crow, she opened her eyes. On any other day, at this hour, she would have been up washing clothes, gathering pig feed, tidying the house, serving breakfast to her father and brother, and then heading to the fields with her mother. But now, there were no scolding words from Emily Jones, nor any shouting from David Smith. Only the sound of steady breathing reached her ears, and Clara Smith suddenly remembered she was now married. Although she had married someone she didn't desire, this was still the best option for her at the moment. As for the future, once she had saved enough resources, she would naturally part ways with this man and make her escape. For now, though, she knew she had to serve the Smith family well. Taking things one day at a time, she was very aware of her place. But for the moment, Clara Smith closed her eyes again, deciding to indulge in a little more sleep. After a deep, restful sleep, the morning light flooded the room. For the first time, Clara Smith felt completely rejuvenated. On the 10th day in this new world, she had finally enjoyed a good night's sleep. At that moment, Sophia Miller also woke up, her face scrunching up as if she was about to cry. Clara Smith quickly got up and scooped the little girl into her arms. "Sophia Miller, be a good girl, don't cry. Let's go outside, have a quick potty break, and then eat breakfast, okay?" While soothing her, Clara dressed the child and carried her outside. In truth, William Brown had been awake since Clara stirred. He kept his eyes closed, held his breath, and silently listened to Clara as she cradled Sophia Miller, gently calming the little girl. She even sang. Her voice was soft and tender, the tune unfamiliar, yet it carried a comforting melody. Only when her singing drifted farther away did he allow himself a satisfied smile. "This girl is starting to look like a real mother now." Soon, the sound of running water echoed from outside. Clara Smith had managed to calm Sophia Miller, and was now scooping water to wash her face. It was only then that William Brown threw on a coat and stepped outside, just as his two sons emerged from the main room. Seeing their sleepy faces, he cleared his throat softly. "Awake already?" Edward Brown shook his head, while Henry Brown still looked dazed. "We haven't heard Sophia Miller crying this morning. My brother and I were wondering if the sun rose earlier today." After all, every day they had been jolted awake by Sophia Miller's cries, marking the start of their busy mornings. And yet, those chaotic days seemed to have ended, all because of one woman's presence. Raising his eyes, William Brown watched Clara Smith tenderly wiping Sophia Miller's face with a damp cloth. A sense of contentment finally welled up in his heart. This house, it was finally beginning to feel like a real home. Chapter 012. Two sons with contrasting personalities. As this thought crossed his mind, William Brown noticed Clara Smith turning her gaze toward them. Their eyes met, and his heart suddenly tightened. This woman, what could she possibly be plotting now? But Clara Smith quickly shifted her gaze, locking her eyes on Edward and Henry Brown. "Come here, boys," she called, motioning for them to approach. Edward Brown's small face remained stern, unmoving. Meanwhile, Henry Brown eagerly trotted over. Without hesitation, Clara gave the younger boy instructions. "Look after Sophia Miller for a bit. Mommy's going to make breakfast." "Yes, ma'am." Henry Brown quickly nodded. "Good boy." Clara Smith cheerfully patted his head. "As a reward, what would Henry like to eat this morning? Just tell me, and I'll make it for you. Eggs, delicious ones." Henry Brown answered without hesitation. "Such a simple request?" Clara Smith raised an eyebrow. Henry Brown quickly put on a serious face. "It's not simple at all." Clara Smith almost felt her heart ache. She immediately pulled the little boy into her arms. "My sweet boy, what kind of days have you been living through before this?" William Brown, who had been eavesdropping nearby, felt his face heat up. After a sigh, Clara Smith gently patted Henry's small head. "Don't worry. This small request of yours, I'll absolutely fulfill it. Moreover, as long as you take good care of your little sister, I'll make sure every meal is delicious for you from now on, okay?" "Okay." Henry Brown eagerly nodded. This adorable response made Clara Smith unable to resist pinching his chubby cheeks before heading to the kitchen. Henry Brown grinned happily, sitting by the cradle and rocking little Sophia gently. When the sounds of pots and pans clattering came from the kitchen, Edward Brown approached with an icy expression. "Do you have no shame at all? Sucking up to that countryside girl like this?" Henry Brown blinked innocently. "But she asked me to help take care of my little sister. She can't do everything on her own. Besides, she promised to make me delicious food." As he spoke, he swallowed hard. "Pathetic. Just a bit of food, and you've already been bribed." Edward Brown sneered openly. Henry Brown still smiled foolishly. "She even patted my head. Her hands are warm, just like Mom's. She's just a country girl. What right does she have to compare to Mother?" Henry Brown froze for a moment, then softly asked, "Brother, do you still remember what Mother looked like?" Edward Brown was taken aback. A stunningly beautiful face flashed in his mind. But on that exquisite face, there was no warmth, only coldness and disdain. "Get away from me. Stop getting in my way. Just looking at you makes me sick." His small fists clenched instinctively, nails digging deep into his palms as sharp pain spread through his hands and body. At this moment, the innocent voice of Henry Brown echoed by his ear. "I don't remember anymore. Actually, before she came back, I even forgot I had a mother." "That's because you were still young back then," Edward Brown said softly. "But it's just as well. What good does it do to remember such things?" Henry Brown nodded repeatedly, then licked his lips. "I think eating is the most important thing. I want something delicious." Edward Brown chuckled at his younger brother's naive expression, pushing aside the slight discomfort in his heart. "All right then, I'll grab a book, and we can watch over Sophia Miller together." He fetched a book, and the two brothers stood beside Sophia's cradle, gently rocking it while reading aloud to their little sister. But after only a few lines, an enticing aroma wafted in from the kitchen. The brothers' reading voices grew softer and softer until they forgot about the book in their hands entirely. Both of them turned their attention toward the kitchen, where the smell grew richer by the moment. William Brown returned from fetching water and noticed their behavior. He asked quietly, "Hungry already?" "No," Edward Brown denied, quickly lowering his head back to the book. But it wasn't long before Clara Smith poked her head out of the kitchen and called loudly, "Time to set the table, dinner's ready." Henry Brown immediately bolted out of the room. Edward Brown paused for a moment, straightened his back, and slowly walked to his room to put the book down. Only then did he leisurely head out to help his brother carry the chairs. By the time the three men had set the table and chairs, Clara Smith had brought out several bowls of steaming hot noodles. "There aren't many ingredients left in the kitchen right now, so I could only make some mincemeat noodles. Please make do with it," she said. In addition to the mincemeat noodles, she had fried an egg for each of the two boys, one shaped like a flower and the other like a rabbit. The eggs looked so lively and adorable. Henry Brown immediately pointed at the rabbit-shaped egg. "I want this one." "All right." Clara Smith picked up the rabbit-shaped egg and placed it into his bowl. The flower-shaped egg was left, and Clara Smith placed it into Edward Brown's bowl. Looking at the delicate little flower, Edward Brown frowned. "What's wrong? Don't like eggs?" Clara Smith asked softly when she noticed his expression. "But you're at the age where you need to eat well and grow. You have to eat this egg." "Right, dear," she said, pulling William Brown into the conversation out of nowhere. Caught off guard, William Brown nodded with a stern face. "Yes." Edward Brown said nothing, silently lowering his head to eat the egg. Though the breakfast was simple, the noodles Clara Smith made were perfectly chewy, and the cooking time was just right. The mincemeat was stir-fried before water was added and brought to a boil, making the broth incredibly fragrant. Before serving, she added a handful of fresh greens, which balanced out the richness of the meat with their crispness. Having a big bowl of such noodles early in the morning left them feeling warm and utterly satisfied. The three men didn't say much, but their enjoyment was evident as they finished every last noodle in their bowls. Henry Brown and William Brown even drank all the broth. Edward Brown didn't drink the broth, but he still finished all the noodles, meat, and vegetables before setting his chopsticks down. "In the future, if you're frying eggs, just fry them plain. Don't make them all fancy." "I'm not a child," he said with a cold expression. "Oh, so you've been upset about this all along?" Clara Smith felt both amused and helpless. "All right, fine," she sighed regretfully. "But I still have a lot of designs left to make. I plan to make 2 fun ones for you all each day, but now I can't do that. I want them. I want them." Henry Brown quickly raised his hand. "Tomorrow, I want cat-shaped fried eggs." Finally, someone showed support. Clara Smith immediately brightened up and nodded quickly. "All right, tomorrow morning I'll make cat-shaped fried eggs for you." Henry Brown grinned widely at her. Such flattery. Edward Brown, seeing this, frowned and coldly said, "Suck up," before standing up and heading back into the house. Chapter 013. Blown out of proportion, this little kid really is the epitome of a tsundere. But what can you do? When someone is both beautiful and tsundere, it's oddly charming. Clara Smith couldn't bring herself to be angry at the boy. But clearly, Edward Brown could. As soon as he got back to his room, he barked, "Henry Brown, go study." Henry Brown stuck out his tongue. "All right, I'm going to study now." And with that, he quickly dashed away. It was evident that the little boy still listened to his older brother, Edward Brown. Watching the two cheap boys disappear from sight, Clara Smith turned back to William Brown, who was still sitting at the table. She beamed at him. "Not full yet?" "No." William Brown shook his head. Clara Smith chuckled. "I guessed as much. There's still one more bowl in the pot for you. Wait here. I'll bring it out right away." As she spoke, she grabbed the empty bowl, filled it to the brim, and placed it in front of him. With the bowl now in front of him, she didn't leave. Instead, she stood there, watching him with that same radiant smile, making William Brown feel helpless. He had no choice but to put down his chopsticks. "If you have something to say, just say it." "All right then, let's discuss something," Clara Smith eagerly replied. The corners of the man's mouth twitched. He knew it. This woman couldn't stay peaceful for long. "Fine, you go first." "What is it?" "Here's the thing. Could you clear the patch of wasteland outside today? Yesterday afternoon, I noticed that we don't even have a vegetable garden." "How can that be?" "With so many people in the house, and the 3 kids growing up, vegetables are definitely a necessity. So, hurry and clean up that land, and we'll plant seeds today, okay?" "Is it really necessary to do that?" William Brown frowned. "Becca Young said their vegetable garden is right next to ours. If we want vegetables, we can just go and pick some." Clara Smith shot him a sharp look and helplessly replied, "You didn't cook much before, and you barely ate any vegetables, so occasionally picking a few from their garden wasn't a big deal. But now that I'm here, we need to live properly. I'll be cooking meals with vegetables every day. Constantly running over to Becca Young's garden. How would that look? Besides, what belongs to others is still theirs. When you take from people, you have to watch your words. Now, it might be easy to take their vegetables, but what if they make an awkward request later? It'd be hard for you to refuse." William Brown narrowed his eyes. "I didn't think you'd understand such principles. Isn't that common sense?" Clara Smith said irritably. "Now tell me, will you agree to this or not? You've made your point. How could I refuse?" William Brown nodded. "Once I finish this bowl of noodles, I'll get to work." "Good, your word is your bond." Clara Smith quickly agreed, then turned to pick up Sophia Miller and began feeding her the bowl of porridge she had prepared. By the time Sophia Miller had eaten half the bowl, William Brown had finished his second bowl of noodles. Finally, he was full. Satisfied, he stood up, grabbed the hoe from the corner of the room, slung it over his shoulder, and headed out to work on the vegetable patch. His temper may be a bit rough, and his words aren't sweet, but he's quick to get things done. Clara Smith nodded in approval before carrying Sophia Miller into the room where Edward Brown and his brother were. The 2 boys were seated at a desk by the window, holding pens, reading aloud, and writing diligently. The sight of the 2 well-behaved, adorable children sitting upright by the window and studying was heartwarming, bringing a smile to Clara Smith's face. But as soon as she stepped in, Edward Brown's expression turned sour. "What are you doing here?" "I'm going to do the laundry. Your father is outside digging the vegetable patch, so I'm leaving Sophia Miller in your care," Clara Smith said, placing both Sophia Miller and her cradle next to the boy's desk. "She's already eaten, so you just need to watch her. I'll be back after I finish the laundry." With that, she turned and walked out, carrying a wooden basin full of dirty clothes. The two boys in the room exchanged glances. Edward Brown stared at Sophia Miller, who was lying in the cradle playing by herself, for a long time before raising his head with a gloomy expression. "Do you see that? This woman just set foot in the house and already acts like no one here matters." "Not really," Henry Brown muttered softly. Edward shot his younger brother a sharp glare. "Shut your mouth. Just because she fed you a few meals, you're already on her side, huh? Her cooking is delicious," Henry mumbled under his breath. But under his elder brother's icy gaze, Henry's voice grew quieter and quieter until it was barely a whisper, like the buzzing of a mosquito. "Besides, she's already left. Are you planning to go out and drag her back? When she comes back, I'll teach her a proper lesson. I'm a man, a real man, not someone born to take care of children." Edward gritted his teeth in frustration. "Yesterday, I gave her too much face, letting her have the upper hand. It's only her second day in this house, and she already dares to act superior to us. Today, I'll make sure she understands the rules of this household." Hearing this, Henry quickly lowered his head and silently recited a prayer for Clara Smith. Though he genuinely enjoyed her cooking, in the face of his brother's wrath, he decided it was safer to side with Edward. After all, they were family. At that moment, Clara Smith had already carried a wooden basin to the small stream at the edge of the village. Several women were already there doing laundry. When they saw Clara approaching, one of them waved her over enthusiastically. "William Brown's wife, come over here. There's space on this side." Clara hurried over, thanking the woman who had called out to her. "Thank you. Oh, come now. No need to be so polite. We're all from the same village." The woman smiled warmly, waving her hand dismissively. Clara returned the smile and began taking clothes out of her basin to wash. Seeing this, the woman couldn't help but sigh. A household without a woman really can't function properly. Just look at how they were living before. A man raising 3 kids on his own. It might seem fine on the surface, but inside, it must have been a complete mess. Now that you've married into the family, you'll surely have to endure a lot of hardship. Poor girl. Clara chuckled lightly. I don't feel pitiful at all. Since marrying into this family, I've had enough to eat and wear, and I even do less work than I did back at my parents' house. Life now feels like a blessing to me. Oh, was there a lot to do at your parents' house? The other women by the stream perked up their ears, clearly intrigued. Clara nodded eagerly and began recounting her experiences at the Smith household over the past few years. Having already decided to sever ties with the Smith family, Clara knew the best approach was to leverage public opinion. By sharing the truth with everyone, she could ensure that when the time came to officially break off relations, the villagers wouldn't judge her too harshly. And so, her plan was set in motion. Chapter 014. The bet the Smith family truly consisted of peculiar people. Clara Smith only needed to recount her experiences over the past 5 days to incite outrage among everyone. Your biological parents are shameless. Spoiling their son is one thing, but favoring him to such an extreme? They're practically pushing you to your death. Your brother isn't any better. I've never seen anyone so arrogant while clinging to their parents. Let me tell you, my own family has a similar case, even worse than yours. That family, just to earn dowry money for their 3 sons, sold their daughter to a wealthy household in town to work as a maid. Every month, they'd go to town and take all her wages. Yet, they still weren't satisfied and blamed her for not pleasing her master enough to climb into his bed. Goodness, how dark-hearted can parents be? Clara Smith listened to the village women gossip about all sorts of outrageous stories, occasionally chiming in with a comment. Before long, she had seamlessly blended into the women's circle in Brown Village. In the end, not only did she gain a clear understanding of the village's dynamics, but she also earned the sympathy of many. Some even stood up for her. Now that she's a stepmother and can't have children, how will she survive in old age without kids? William is being completely unreasonable. Oh, what can I do? He won't allow me to have more children. Could I secretly get pregnant? Life as it is now is already good enough. I've resigned myself to it. Clara Smith sighed dramatically. But honestly, I don't have the energy to think about that anymore. The main issue is the number of mouths to feed at home. The house is already a mess, and the vegetable garden outside is barren. How can we survive like this? So many people waiting to be fed. I can't keep shamelessly begging for vegetables from every household every day. Ladies, does anyone have some extra vegetable plants I can take to grow at home? Having said this, how could the women refuse her? After all, a few vegetable plants were nothing of value in the countryside. Many readily agreed. No problem. Come by my house later and dig some up. Clara Smith nodded eagerly, making sure to note down each address before carrying her clean laundry out to hang. Once the clothes were hung, Clara Smith went into the kitchen, took down a piece of smoked meat hanging from the beam, and cut a few small slices to put into her basket. As she stepped outside with the basket, she saw Edward Brown standing stiffly in the yard. Seeing her, the boy coldly said, "I have something to discuss with you. Can you wait a moment? I have something urgent to do." Clara Smith replied, "What urgent matter could you possibly have?" Edward Brown clearly didn't believe her. A rural woman, newly married into the Brown family in this village, still unfamiliar with her surroundings. What urgent business could she have? Surely, she was making it up. Clara Smith explained, "I've already spoken to the villagers. I'm going to their homes to ask for some vegetable seedlings to plant. Spring planting season has already passed, so sowing seeds might not work in time. Besides, there are so many mouths to feed at home. It's most convenient to ask for some seedlings from their gardens. They'll grow immediately after planting and can be harvested quickly. You've just arrived, and you've already convinced the villagers to give you vegetables?" Edward Brown looked skeptical. This little brat, did he dare doubt her? Clara Smith raised her eyebrows and looked at him. "Don't believe me? How about we make a bet?" "What bet?" "If I win, you carry the basket for me. And if you lose, you set the terms?" "All right. Then I want you to listen to me in everything from now on. No more ordering me around for every little thing." "No problem." Clara Smith agreed cheerfully. "Shall we go now?" "Let's go." Edward Brown puffed out his chest and strode forward. Clara Smith turned back and waved at Henry Brown. "Henry, do you want to come along?" "Yes." Henry Brown quickly ran over. Clara Smith picked up Sophia Miller, took her two sons by the hand, and headed straight to the first house. When Clara Smith arrived with the three children, the Randy Brown family was surprised. Randy Brown's wife, the woman who had been chatting animatedly with Clara Smith by the stream earlier, hurried out to greet her. "Clara, you came so quickly." "That's right. These two kids insisted on coming along to help carry the basket, so I had to bring them. Kids will be kids, a little mischievous sometimes. Please don't mind them," Clara Smith said with a smile, and then turned to her sons. "Say hello." "Hello, Uncle." "Hello, Auntie," the two boys said in unison. The Randy Brown family was taken aback. Since the day William Brown brought his three children back, the four of them had lived a secluded life, interacting with no one except for the seventh aunt next door. His two sons only stayed around their house and never ventured out. Even when someone passed by, they would act as if they didn't see them, leaving the villagers shaking their heads and complaining that the boys were poorly raised. They said that no matter how handsome they might grow up to be, they wouldn't amount to much. Yet now, these two boys didn't seem impolite at all. Randy Brown's wife forced a smile. Good, good, good. The boys are very well behaved. Clara Smith then pulled out a small piece of smoked meat from her basket. We don't have much at home, but here's a little smoked meat my husband bought the other day. I've cut a piece for you. Please don't mind it. Randy Brown's wife immediately beamed with delight. The villagers, who lived modestly throughout the year, only got to enjoy a piece of meat during the new year. On regular days, they subsisted on simple vegetables and pickles, their meals bland and flavorless. Now, they willingly offered Clara Smith some vegetables, without expecting anything in return. After all, they were neighbors. Helping others was like helping themselves. Who would have thought that as soon as Clara Smith stepped inside, she would pull out a piece of meat? Though it was just a small portion of salted meat, with careful rationing, it could last them a few decent meals. What an unexpected delight! The Randy Brown family was overjoyed, brimming with happiness as they eagerly led Clara Smith to their vegetable garden. Without Clara even lifting a finger, Randy Brown and his wife rolled up their sleeves, digging up various vegetables until they had filled an entire basket. Seeing the basket overflowing with fresh produce, Clara Smith beamed brightly. Thank you, Brother Randy, thank you, sister-in-law. It's nothing, Clara. Feel free to visit us anytime. Randy Brown's wife stood at the door, laughing heartily as she waved goodbye. As Clara Smith left the Randy Brown household, she turned to Edward Brown and pouted playfully. Well, my dear boy, you lost the bet. Carry the basket now. Chapter 015. Willing to bet, ready to lose, Edward Brown glared at her fiercely but begrudgingly picked up the basket. Clara Smith laughed heartily and waved her hand. Let's go, on to the next house. Just like the previous visit, as soon as Clara Smith brought out some dried meat, the attitude of the neighbors instantly became enthusiastic. By the end of their rounds, after visiting 4 households, their baskets, crates, and shoulder poles were brimming with fresh vegetables. Finally, Edward Brown carried the basket, Henry Brown lugged the crate, Clara Smith balanced 2 shoulder poles, and on her back she carried little Sophia Miller. The 4 of them triumphantly returned home laden with their bounty. William Brown, who had just finished weeding the vegetable garden and was tilling the soil, suddenly looked up. Seeing Clara Smith and the 2 children returning with their arms full, he was so startled that he dropped his hoe. What on earth are you all doing? He shouted loudly, quickly rushing out of the garden. Clara Smith jumped at his loud voice. Why are you yelling like that? Shouting in broad daylight is bound to frighten people. William Brown paid no attention to her. He hurriedly reached out, intending to take the basket and crate from Edward Brown and his younger brother, but Edward remained still. I admit defeat, the boy said coldly. William Brown squinted and turned to look at Clara Smith. Clara shrugged. That's how it is. He made a bet with me, and he lost. So, he has to fulfill his promise. By the way, Edward, though young, knows how to keep his word. That's commendable. Hearing such generous praise, Edward Brown's lips curled slightly, but he quickly pressed them into a firm line. And Henry, too. Even though he's younger, he's diligent, understanding, and so strong. Clara added with another compliment for Henry Brown. Henry immediately beamed with joy. I'll take the vegetables inside, the boy cheerfully exclaimed, then dashed off into the garden with the basket on his back. The basket full of vegetables seemed to weigh nothing to him. Seeing this, Edward Brown also placed his basket down in the garden before turning back with a sullen expression. You didn't say anything to me and secretly brought dried meat. We didn't have any agreement that tools couldn't be used to achieve our goals. Clara replied calmly. Besides, you saw it clearly. Without the dried meat, they would still have given us vegetables, just not as much. But once you've accepted something from others, it's hard to refuse further obligations. I don't want to owe them a favor over a basket of vegetables and end up being forced into things I don't want to do later. So, it's better to settle things now and avoid future trouble, don't you think? Of course, if you think my reasoning is wrong, I'll definitely change. Her logic left no room for argument. What could they possibly say? The three men, none of whom were particularly eloquent, chose to remain silent in the face of Clara's unrelenting reasoning. After a long pause, Edward Brown finally glared at her. With such a sharp tongue, you shouldn't have been born in the countryside. You should be on the battlefield, issuing challenges. On the battlefield issuing challenges? Clara was startled by his words. William Brown's face immediately darkened. Edward, you should take your brother to study now. Edward snapped back to his senses, quickly lowered his head, and pulled his younger brother away. Having suffered such a stinging defeat at the hands of a village girl, he no longer had the heart to think about imposing any rules on her. Clara Smith wasn't foolish. Seeing the situation, she vaguely understood what was going on. But for now, she pretended not to notice and simply stared at the vegetable garden ahead. The kids have gone to study, so are we working in the fields? Yes. William Brown nodded. Clara then carried Sophia Miller's cradle out and placed it under a large tree in the garden. Rolling up her sleeves, she said, All right, let's get started. It took the two of them half a day to finish tilling the soil, sowing all the seeds, and then William Brown carried water to irrigate everything thoroughly. By now, it was late afternoon time for dinner. After tidying up the farming tools, William Brown took the initiative to carry Sophia Miller, his eyes glowing as he looked at Clara Smith. Clara Smith reluctantly spread her hands. We're out of vegetables at home, only leafy greens left. Are you planning to feed the kids just boiled greens? There's still some dried meat, but eating too much isn't good, especially when the kids are growing. I understand. William Brown nodded and immediately turned to leave. About the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, he returned, holding a carp and a piece of soft tofu in his hands. It's late. All the fish on the boats were sold out. Only this one was left. Will it do? Of course. As soon as she saw the fish, Clara Smith had already thought of how to prepare it. She happily took the fish and tofu, then turned toward the kitchen. Oh, carp, you're lucky to meet me today. I'll make you into a top-notch dish so you can leave this world with no regrets. Watching her cheerful figure skip into the kitchen, a faint warmth flickered in William Brown's usually somber gaze. This woman, she's not bad. At least she cooks well, he muttered. Clara Smith was genuinely delighted. The last time she cooked fish at the Smith household, due to limited resources, she could only prepare 2 fish hastily, which really didn't meet her standards. This had been a lingering regret for her, and she still felt guilty about those 2 fish even now. So now, with a rare opportunity to redeem herself, she was determined to give it her all. After cleaning the fish, she chopped off its head and cooked it with tofu to make a braised fish dish. The fish meat was deboned, skinned, minced, and shaped into small balls to be used in a soup with leafy greens. The fish skin was blanched, soaked in cold water, seasoned, and topped with a sprinkle of scallions, creating a refreshing salad. Finally, she shredded some tender carrots and stir-fried them lightly with oil, completing the final vegetable dish. A sumptuous meal, full of color, aroma, and flavor, was soon laid out on the table. Henry's eyes lit up with excitement the moment he saw it. Today, I want 2 bowls of rice. The chubby little boy raised 2 fingers. All right. But you can't just eat the meat. If you want a second bowl of rice, you'll have to eat 3 pieces of carrot as well. Clara Smith seriously negotiated with him. Henry pouted. Do I really have to eat that much? Yes. Clara Smith nodded firmly. But immediately, she softened her tone. If you eat 3 more pieces today, I'll make dumplings for you tomorrow. The filling will be minced bacon stir-fried with bamboo shoots wrapped in soft dough. How does that sound? Just hearing this, Henry gulped audibly. All right. The little boy quickly nodded. For the sake of tomorrow's dumplings, he was determined to give it his all. Chapter 016. The boss admits defeat after coaxing her youngest son. Clara Smith glanced at Edward Brown, who was quietly eating his rice, and deliberately teased him. How many bowls of rice are you planning to eat today? Unexpectedly, the boy responded indifferently. 2 bowls. Oh, so calm, huh? Not a hint of anger, nor a look of disdain cast her way. His tone was eerily composed. It felt as though he was having a casual conversation with her. It seemed that losing the bet today had dealt him a crushing blow. Clara Smith felt secretly pleased and quickly nodded. All right. As for William Brown, no need to ask, just serve him a big bowl. The dishes Clara Smith cooked were, without a doubt, delicious. Braised fish with tofu, soft tofu soaked in the sweet flavor of the fish, absolutely mouth-watering. Even better than meat, fish ball soup, soft, fragrant, delightful whether paired with rice or sipped alone, fish skin salad, chewy and crunchy, incredibly satisfying to eat, and stir-fried carrots, light yet perfectly appetizing. 3 men, 1 grown and 2 small, once they picked up their chopsticks, wouldn't stop until their stomachs were full. Seeing everyone enjoying her cooking so much, Clara Smith felt deeply satisfied. Afterward, she brought out a bowl of fish porridge she had prepared especially for Sophia Miller, and began feeding the little girl spoon by spoon. Once dinner was over, Clara Smith cleaned up the dishes and retreated to the bed, collapsing onto it. Finally, a moment to rest. In the quiet, she could hear a clear, resonant voice reading aloud in the yard. Edward Brown was teaching Henry Brown, word by word, and he was teaching with such authority too. Some essays were so complex that even Clara found them hard to understand, yet Edward Brown recited them fluently. Moreover, the 8-year-old's voice was crisp and clear, his pronunciation precise, and his rhythm smooth and melodious, making it pleasant to listen to. Henry Brown, on the other hand, seemed a bit confused. A single sentence took 5 repetitions, and he still might not remember it, prompting Edward to occasionally scold him. But after scolding, Edward patiently repeated the lesson until his younger brother got it right. Edward was doing a pretty good job as an older brother. Clara Smith thought to herself and got up, intending to sneak to the window to watch the 2 brothers study when William Brown walked in. We need to talk about visiting your parents tomorrow. All right. Clara Smith nodded. What's your plan? That's something I should be asking you. You know your parents best. What do you think we should prepare? Honestly, my parents are lacking in everything, but what they lack the most is money. Too bad you won't give them any. The man narrowed his eyes. At least you're self-aware. Clara Smith chuckled softly. So, all we need to do is bring a piece of meat. Are you sure? The man looked skeptical. Clara Smith nodded firmly. Absolutely sure. That's the perfect plan. Last time you came to meet them, you brought so many gifts. If we go back this time with another pile of good stuff, they'll truly think you're loaded, a fat sheep ready to be fleeced. Afterward, they'll find every excuse to come asking you for money. Would you like that? William Brown frowned. Before he could respond, Clara Smith shook her head. I wouldn't like it, that's for sure. You already had to pretend to be rich once to marry me. This time, you absolutely must pretend to be poor. So poor that they'll want to cut ties with us and never bother us again. That would be ideal. William Brown looked at her suspiciously. Are you really their biological daughter? He had never seen anyone throw shade at their own parents like this before. Clara Smith pouted. I am indeed their biological daughter. Otherwise, why do you think I insisted on asking you for an additional 3 taels of silver for the betrothal gift? That money was for them. And do you know, before you, they even considered marrying me off to 2 other families? She then recounted the situations with the York family and the Neeson family. William Brown had, of course, heard of these 2 families. But now, hearing Clara Smith explain why David Smith and his father chose those 2 families, his face darkened. I thought their behavior last time at the Smith family was already outrageous, but I underestimated them. To some people, daughters are worth nothing compared to sons. Even she thinks that way. I've already come to terms with it, and you should too. Whether or not they acknowledge me doesn't matter anymore. I'm no longer part of the Smith family. Just wait, tomorrow when we visit, I'll give you quite a show. Clara Smith winked at him. William Brown couldn't help but twitch his lips. Let's not. He had only known her for a few days, and she had already shown him countless shows. Even Edward Brown had to swallow his pride and endure under her hand, refusing to talk to them to this day. Ever since settling down in Brown Village, this was the first time William had seen Edward Brown look so grim. Clara Smith smiled again. I have many things to discuss with you, but I'm tired now. You should go prepare the gifts for tomorrow's visit. After we return, we'll talk later. William Brown suddenly felt uneasy. Every time she said she wanted to discuss something with him, it inevitably meant trouble. And now, she still wasn't done and had many things to discuss. How long was this woman planning to stir things up? But then he thought, at worst, soldiers come to block enemies, water rises to stop floods. He was a man. How could he be afraid of a mere woman like her? Saying so would only make others laugh their heads off. He gritted his teeth, stared at Clara Smith for a moment, then turned and went to buy some meat. The next morning, as soon as the sun rose, Clara Smith followed custom, got up, and busied herself in the kitchen. After nearly half an hour, she finally prepared a large tray of pastries. These 10 are filled with smoked meat and bamboo shoots, and these 10 are filled with vegetables. 2 types of filling, help yourselves. She placed the tray on the table and spoke. Seeing so many pastries, William Brown frowned. You made so many, planning to eat them over 2 days? I made them for the Brown brothers. I suppose the 2 of you aren't planning to visit the Smith family with us today, are you? Clara Smith said. William Brown raised an eyebrow, while Edward Brown smirked slightly. You guessed right. We don't plan to go. I may have maternal relatives, but I don't recognize that Smith family as any of them. That's why I made food for you 2 in advance. If you don't finish, just leave it in the kitchen. When you're hungry, help yourselves, Clara Smith said. She wasn't angry. She even proactively prepared food for them. Edward Brown glanced at her, then nodded. Got it. After being repeatedly outmaneuvered by her, he decided to endure and temporarily avoid direct confrontation. That woman was full of schemes, and at the moment, he was no match for her. For now, he could only endure. Chapter 017. Returning to her family's home, however, Edward Brown didn't think for a moment that he had admitted defeat. He told himself that he was simply someone who understood the situation. Only a wise hero knows when to yield. After all, Clara Smith was much older than him, so it was understandable to lose the first battle. But next time, when he made his move, he was determined to succeed. He believed that wholeheartedly. After all, he was still just a child, and no matter how clever, he couldn't completely hide his thoughts. Clara Smith noticed the shift in his expression, from dissatisfaction to determination, after he silently made up his mind. She even caught a glimpse of a little smugness on his face. Trying hard not to laugh, she felt her insides twist. How could this little boy be both so arrogant and so adorable at the same time? She couldn't wait to see what tricks he would come up with to try and deal with her. And then, of course, she wouldn't hold back at all and would smash him to the ground. Just imagining the scene lifted her spirits. She immediately tended to the two children, making sure they ate breakfast. Afterward, she gave the siblings a few instructions on what to keep in mind while at home, before heading off with William Brown to take Sophia Miller back to the Smith village. As soon as they entered the village, someone ran up to them. "Clara, you're back. There's trouble at your house. Hurry and check it out." William Brown quickly looked at Clara Smith, who winked at him. "The fun begins. Do you want to watch? If you do, let's hurry up. If not, take your time and prepare yourself. Either way, we'll have to face it sooner or later. Better to tackle it quickly," William Brown said in a low voice. "All right, then." Stupid man, no sense of romance at all. Clara Smith cursed inwardly as she hurried after him. When they reached the Smith family's house, they hadn't even stepped inside before hearing Emily Jones, Clara Smith's mother, crying loudly. Mixed in were the sounds of cursing and the banging of furniture by George Smith. It was quite the commotion. Poor furniture, Clara Smith thought. Who knew how many times it had been smashed by George Smith and his father? She pushed open the front door and stepped inside. "Father, Mother, we're back!" Clara Smith called out cheerfully, pretending to be in high spirits. The moment she spoke, she could feel several pairs of eyes staring straight at her. "Clara, you're finally back!" Emily Jones immediately rushed over, grabbing her sleeve tightly and refusing to let go. "Something big has happened at home. Your father, that useless old man, secretly took 15 taels of silver and ran away." As expected, she had known that David Smith couldn't possibly hold on to such a large sum of money. Clara Smith was thinking of how to comfort Emily Jones when George Smith stormed in furiously. "Why are you only coming now? I've been waiting for you all day." He spotted the basket in William Brown's hand and snatched it away immediately. "What did you bring back for me? Just a piece of meat? You dare bring just one piece of meat?" He threw the entire basket of meat outside. "I don't want meat, I want money. That 15 taels of silver were meant for my wedding. I've already discussed it with Daisy Wilson's family. Now that this has happened, what's going to happen to my marriage? Clara, you must give me another 15 taels. If you don't have the money, don't even think about stepping through this door." William Brown coldly stared at George Smith, who was shamelessly spouting such words, his face darkening. "The bride price I was supposed to pay has already been given. How your family spends that money is the Smith family's business and has nothing to do with me. I don't care. You still have to give me money. If you don't, I'll take Clara back." George Smith began to act up, reaching out to pull Clara Smith toward him. But Clara Smith had already anticipated his intentions. She immediately turned and hid behind William Brown. "Brother, can you stop harming me? I'm now part of the Brown family. You have no right to keep me here. I don't care. No money, no entry." George Smith barked aggressively, driven by greed. However, such petty threats had no effect on Clara Smith and William Brown. Clara Smith was even so pleased that her eyes sparkled brightly. "Really not letting us in?" she asked one last time. "If you don't pay, you're not coming in." George Smith huffed and nodded. "All right then, we won't go in." Clara Smith nodded and said to William Brown, "Anyway, we've already reached the door and met the person. Our task is complete, we can retreat now." In truth, She didn't want to stay in the Smith family for even a moment longer. Hearing this, George Smith angrily raised his hand, intending to slap Clara Smith across the face. "You wretched woman, are you tired of living? How dare you go against your own brother? I'll beat you to death." In the past, it had always been like this. Whenever he felt upset, George would hit Clara Smith whenever and however he pleased. Clara would obediently endure his beatings and scoldings, never daring to dodge, let alone fight back. But this time, his raised hand couldn't come down, because William Brown, quick as lightning, reached out and grabbed George's wrist. Instantly, his arm seemed nailed in midair, unable to move up or down. Escape? Dream on. George Smith struggled until his face turned red, but his wrist remained firmly clutched in William Brown's grip. In pain, he shouted at William Brown, "Brown, what are you doing? I'm your brother-in-law. How dare you disrespect your brother-in-law like this?" William Brown coldly replied, "She is now part of the Brown family. If anyone is to discipline her, it's me, not you. You have no right." Emily Jones, seeing this, hurriedly ran over. But instead of confronting William Brown, she lunged at Clara Smith. "It's all your fault, you wretched girl. Tell him to let go of my son. If anything happens to him, I'll risk my life to fight you both." Clara Smith, annoyed, shoved her away. "Mother, can you stop causing trouble? Don't you know what kind of person father is? In the past, whenever the family had some money, he'd squander it all and wouldn't come home until it was gone. And now, you two took the bride price money and didn't even keep an eye on him. You just let him run off like that? It seems like you did it on purpose. You knew stopping him would get you beaten, so you didn't dare to stop him. And now that you're angry, you're taking it out on me because I'm the easiest to bully." Hearing this, William Brown's gaze instantly turned icy. Emily Jones, struck by Clara's words, wanted to slap her daughter a few times. But when she saw William Brown standing tall like a god of vengeance, she hesitated. Instead, she decisively sat down on the ground and began wailing miserably. "Everyone, come and see! Clara and her husband are trying to drive us to our deaths. Come see the shameless couple." Her cries echoed loudly, quickly drawing a crowd of villagers to watch. Chapter 018. The Scheme of the Jones Mother and Son. Emily Jones saw someone approaching, and she immediately started wailing even louder. "Everyone, look at this! It's that ungrateful Clara Smith! She's trying to drive me to my grave! She's only been married a few days, and she's already neglecting her own family. I just said a few words to her, and now her husband wants to hit us. There's no justice in this world. Why is my life so miserable? I raised her, and now she's turned into an ungrateful wolf." Seeing her crying so pitifully, anyone unaware of the situation might really think she had been wronged. William Brown noticed the neighbors quickly gathering around, pointing and whispering. Instinctively, he wanted to explain, but Clara Smith quickly shook her head at him. "Wait, leave this to me. Don't rush." Should he let her handle it? William Brown wanted to ask. But on second thought, this young woman had been handling things quite well these past few days. Moreover, this matter involved her family, and she understood these people better than anyone. Handing it over to her was probably the right decision. He stayed silent. Clara Smith patiently waited for Emily Jones to finish crying before asking, "Mother, do you know where Father took the 15 taels of silver? Do I even need to say it? He must have gone off with those no-good friends of his to squander it." Emily Jones blurted out, tears and snot streaming down her face. "Why is my life so bitter, being stuck with a husband like that? My whole life is ruined. Then, after you found out Father left, why didn't you go look for him? Where would I even start looking? Where could I find him? Even if I did find him, that old man wouldn't come back, and he'd probably beat me instead. If you've been married to him for so many years and still have no way to deal with him, how do you expect us to help? Tell your husband to give us another 15 taels of silver. After all, he has money." At this point, everything seemed to come to an end as Clara Smith stepped aside. William Brown's face was as dark as the bottom of a pot. Quite a few onlookers chuckled at Emily Jones's shameless behavior. "I thought there was some misunderstanding between them, but it turns out they just want to extort more money from the daughter they already married off. Clara truly has a miserable fate, beaten and scolded every day at home, sold off for 15 taels of silver when she grew up, and now they're demanding another 15 taels? That's 15 taels of silver, not just 15 coins. So what? The Brown family used to run a big business in the provincial capital, didn't they? Even if they've fallen on hard times, a skinny camel is still bigger than a fat horse. Just a little bit of their leftovers is enough to feed our entire family. 15 taels of silver is nothing to him," George Smith declared arrogantly. It was obvious that the mother and son had already conspired beforehand. Clara Smith, long accustomed to the shamelessness of this family, remained relatively calm. But William Brown was about to explode. "I don't have money, and even if I did, I wouldn't throw it away on your family. Stop dreaming." With that, he grabbed Clara Smith's hand. "Let's go!" He couldn't stay here any longer. Clara obediently followed him, walking away quickly. "You? No, you can't leave." Realizing things weren't going his way, George Smith shouted and rushed to block their path. William Brown pushed him aside. "Brother-in-law, you'd better start figuring out how to find your father and salvage whatever you can. We're heading home. Clara Smith, dare to take one more step, and I won't acknowledge you as my sister anymore. If anything happens to you in the Brown family from now on, I won't stand up for you," George Smith roared. Stand up for her? He was only good at causing trouble. "Then from now on, I'll consider myself without a family." She spoke loudly, without hesitation, and strode forward. "You?" George Smith could never have imagined that the timid and submissive younger sister he used to boss around had now transformed into someone completely different, breaking free from his control entirely. Grinding his teeth furiously, he spat. "Fine. Remember, these are your words. Clara Smith, you'll regret this. But by the time you regret it, it'll be too late. Even if you kneel at our doorstep and beg us to forgive you, I won't agree. Then you'll see how miserable a woman without her family's support can be." He jumped and screamed, shouting until his voice was hoarse, but he couldn't stop Clara Smith and William Brown from disappearing into the distance. Watching their retreating figures without looking back, he turned around in frustration and kicked Emily Jones. "This is all your fault. Look at how you raised your daughter." Emily Jones had just gotten up when George Smith kicked her down again. She let out a cry of, "Ouch!" But instead of blaming her son, she turned to scold her daughter. "Clara Smith, you heartless wretch. Got married and forgot your parents. You ungrateful wolf-hearted creature. Heaven won't forgive you. You'll be struck by lightning, and even in death, you'll descend to the 18 levels of hell, climbing mountains of knives and plunging into boiling cauldrons, never to find peace for all eternity." Unfortunately, no matter how pitifully she wailed, no one around her felt any sympathy for her anymore. Clara Smith and William Brown strode out of the village. William Brown gradually slowed his pace. "You knew this would happen?" His voice deepened. "Yes." Clara Smith nodded. William Brown abruptly turned to look at her. Clara Smith helplessly spread her hands. "I told you already, my parents are completely heartless. My father has been a good-for-nothing since he was young, indulging in all sorts of vices. Whenever there was some money at home, he'd squander it on drinking and women. From childhood to adulthood, my memories are filled with him never being home, and then one day, creditors dragging him to our door over his debts. After that, my mother would scramble everywhere borrowing money, and drag me out to toil to pay it off. It was an endless cycle year after year. Our family never had more than 10 coins to its name. Of course, no matter what, my father and brother always lived comfortably. No matter how poor the family was, it never affected them. They ate well, dressed warmly, and whenever they were in a bad mood, they took it out on us. If Clara Smith had said these things before today, William Brown would have thought she was exaggerating. But now, after witnessing firsthand the outrageous behavior of her family, he had no reason to doubt her words. Growing up in a family like that, and not turning out like your mother is truly a miracle. No, Clara Smith initially was just like Emily Jones. Knowing she was about to be sold by her parents to get a wife for her brother, she only dared to cry in secret, planning to wipe her tears and accept her parents' arrangement afterward. If it hadn't been for crying so hard, compounded by years of malnutrition, causing her to faint from low blood pressure when she stood up and accidentally fall into the water, she wouldn't have had the chance to come to this world. Chapter 019. William Brown in shock. She was also a girl of ill fate. From a young age, she had been indoctrinated by her family in such a way that she fundamentally saw nothing wrong with selling herself so her brother could get married. In fact, when she learned that she could contribute to the continuation of the Smith family bloodline, beyond the sadness, she even felt a tinge of pride. Clara Smith sighed. Anyway, my lifelong dream has been to leave that wretched place. Now that I've finally left, I just want to sever all ties with them completely, never to see them again if possible. Otherwise, they'll surely cling to me like leeches, draining me dry. You can imagine that, can't you? William Brown nodded. I've seen it firsthand today. That's why, from now on, let's not have any dealings with them. At most, during holidays, we can send some gifts through someone else out of courtesy, but meeting face to face is out of the question. They weren't my parents to begin with, so I have no objections to cutting ties. But they are your biological parents after all. Are you sure you can do this? They weren't my real parents to begin with. I've already done my part by borrowing this body and helping them get 15 taels of silver. That's more than enough. If they didn't cherish that money and instead grew greedier, then that was their problem. After all, I've done everything I could and have no regrets. Clara Smith thought to herself, then nodded without hesitation. I can do it. Now, I just want to live my own life. They have enough people to rely on. I can't bear the burden, so I'll simply let go. Although he knew she was right, hearing his wife calmly say she was cutting ties with her own family still left William Brown feeling a bit uneasy. This woman, she was far too composed. He didn't like her cold and detached demeanor. No, that wasn't right. William Brown suddenly shuddered. What did her demeanor have to do with him? Her distancing herself from her family saved him a lot of trouble. He should be glad. In his household, all she needed to do was obediently cook, clean, and take good care of Sophia Miller. What more could he ask for? As for whether he liked her or not, he hadn't planned on liking her in the first place. His heart raced, a whirlwind of complex emotions rising within him, leaving William Brown confused. At that moment, Clara Smith looked at him. What's wrong with you? Your face looks terrible. Are you sick? None of your business. This has nothing to do with you. William Brown blurted out, then strode away quickly, almost fleeing her sight. Clara Smith was startled by his sudden outburst. By the time she gathered herself, the man was already gone. Moreover, his steps were so quick that he had left her far behind in an instant. Hey, wait for me! Clara Smith hurriedly shouted and chased after him. Unexpectedly, just as she lifted her foot, William Brown sped up, turning away and leaving her far behind. What's wrong with him? He was fine just now. Why did he suddenly change his attitude? I didn't even say anything wrong. Clara Smith was utterly confused. Though frustrated, she quickened her pace to follow him. As they approached the Brown family's residence, William Brown finally remembered that she was still behind him. He slowed down, allowing Clara Smith to barely catch up. However, even then, he neither turned around nor spoke a word to her. The two of them, one ahead and one behind, returned to the village. The villagers greeted them upon seeing them. William Brown, weren't you two visiting your in-laws today? Why are you back so early? Did they not invite you to stay for a meal? William Brown kept a cold expression and said nothing. Seeing this as a good opportunity, Clara Smith quickly sniffled, lowered her head, and put on an extremely embarrassed look. Don't blame him. It's all my fault. I don't even have the face to meet anyone anymore. After saying this ambiguous line, she hastily covered her face with her hands and ran home sobbing. William Brown watched her flawless act, the corner of his mouth twitching, but he quickly straightened his face and strode after her. This time, it was his turn to chase Clara Smith. Clara Smith dashed home, pushed the door open, and burst into uncontrollable laughter. This is amazing! It's like finding something without even looking for it. After laughing for a while, she noticed something felt off in the courtyard. Raising her head abruptly, she realized that not far ahead, Edward Brown and his younger brother were staring at her with astonished expressions. After everyone had left, the two brothers had been sitting in the courtyard reading and practicing calligraphy. Without needing adult supervision, Edward Brown had taken it upon himself to oversee his younger sibling. Oh! Only now did Clara Smith realize she had embarrassed herself in front of the kids. She quickly took a deep breath and tried to put on a stern expression. We're back. So how's everything? Are you happy? Henry Brown thought for a moment and then nodded. Edward Brown, however, looked at her with disdain. I've been racking my brain trying to figure out how to deal with you. But now it seems I was just wasting my time. Why would he bother taking a madwoman seriously? At this moment, William Brown had just returned home. As he stepped through the doorway, he immediately said to his two sons, You two, get inside quickly. We'll have guests arriving soon. Edward Brown hurriedly pulled Henry Brown into the house. Sure enough, just as the two brothers entered, someone knocked on the door. Leading the group was none other than Becca Young. Hearing the knock, William Brown carried Sophia Miller into the house, leaving Clara Smith alone to deal with the visitors. Aunt Seven, however, was overly enthusiastic. Clara, what's going on with you two? Haven't you been doing well these past 2 days? Why is it that the moment you visit your family, things have already... Her words sounded concerned, but her eyes sparkled mischievously, clearly eager to gossip. This was exactly the expression Clara Smith had been waiting for. She rubbed her eyes hard until they turned red, then looked up, her face full of grievance. Today, Cy, I don't even know how to put it. Oh dear, what's so hard to say? What happened to you two? Tell us, maybe we can help. Aunt Seven stammered. The other women, who had followed along, chimed in eagerly as well. Clara Smith pretended to hesitate for a moment before recounting everything that happened today at the Smith household. Yesterday, Clara Smith had already shared by the stream at the edge of the village about the sheer greed of her parents and brother. By last night, the entire village knew that William Brown's wife was a daughter neglected and mistreated by her family. And today confirmed it even more. The girl was treated as nothing in her own family. After all, she had just gotten married and returned to visit her family. On such an occasion, parents were supposed to maintain some dignity, weren't they? Yet her parents went as far as to demand an additional 15 silver taels. As a result, The Smith family's reputation in Brown Village was utterly ruined. Chapter 020. Self-indulgent feelings. In the end, the group of women who came to gossip didn't help with anything. Only Becca Young clung to Clara Smith, persistently asking about her dowry. Clara's face looked gloomy, but she still recounted every detail clearly from start to finish. After hearing it all, the women expressed their sympathy. Sigh, how pitiful. But it's all right. Now you're part of the Brown family. William is a good man. He definitely won't bully you just because you lack support from your maternal family. Becca Young tried to console her, but the smirk at the corner of her lips betrayed her true feelings. Clara sniffled a few times. It's all right. This is my fate. I'll accept it. The women sighed again, offering a few more words of encouragement before taking their leave one by one. Clara bowed her head as she escorted them to the door. As soon as the last person crossed the threshold, Clara quickly slammed the door shut. Turning around, her face lit up with a bright smile. It's done! She exhaled in relief, skipping back into the house. You really know how to seize the moment. A cold voice suddenly rang out from ahead. William Brown was walking out, carrying Sophia Miller in his arms. Clara grinned, nodding. Of course. An opportunity like this is too good to miss. After today, if the Smith family dares to cause trouble in Brown Village again, we'll have a legitimate reason to kick them out. As for the Smith village, we most likely won't need to go back anymore. It's like I've finally cut ties with those people. She couldn't believe her luck in resolving such a deep-seated problem so quickly. Even though William Brown repeatedly told himself not to overthink it, he still found her smile unusually dazzling. He quickly placed Sophia Miller into her arms. They're gone now, so you can keep looking after the baby. Then he turned and walked away. Wait! Clara hurriedly chased after him. William frowned in irritation. What now? It's about what I mentioned to you yesterday. There are still so many things I want to discuss with you. Now that we have time, let's sit down and talk. Discuss what? How much money do we have left in the house? William spun around abruptly. What do you plan to do? Seeing him full of vigilance, Clara Smith sighed reluctantly. Look around. See how desolate the house is now. The kitchen is no better, though we have pots and pans. The only seasonings are oil, salt, and vinegar. We don't even have soy sauce, let alone anything else. How can I show off my cooking skills like this? Surely you don't want the kids to eat just rice and plain vegetables every day, right? We need to catch a few chickens to raise. That way, we'll have fresh eggs daily without needing to buy them. The household consumes quite a number of eggs every day. And another thing, the kids' clothes are all too short. Edward's sleeves and pant legs are completely shrunken. Henry must be wearing his older brother's hand-me-downs, right? They're way too big, making him look like a child sneaking into adult clothes, and it's inconvenient for him to move around. And Sophia Miller, such a cute little girl wrapped in that dull gray fabric. Don't you feel sorry for her? Our daughter must be the prettiest child in the village. William Brown realized he might have wronged her. Just as he started to feel guilty, he heard Clara Smith continue. Besides, I need to buy fabric to make myself a few dresses. I only brought 2 patched-up outfits here, and they're too shabby to wear outside. I've been so well behaved these past few days. You should reward me with a few new dresses, right? She certainly knew how to stand her ground. Though her words were partly about herself, most of them were for the family and the children. William Brown decided not to argue with her anymore. Just in time, I'm working on a batch of chairs for Chen's furniture shop in town. Once I'm done, we'll go. All right. I'll wait for you. Clara Smith nodded eagerly. She carried Sophia Miller and cheerfully headed back into the house. In the following days, William Brown busied himself making furniture in the backyard, while Clara Smith tidied up the house, tended the vegetable garden, and prepared meals for the family, barely catching her breath. After 4 or 5 days of hard work, she finally got everything in order. By this time, she had also grown close to the women in the village. In the process, news about her family background had spread throughout Brown Village. Many people looked at her with sympathetic eyes. Except for Mrs. Bay. That old woman, with nothing better to do, frequently visited Clara's house, trying to befriend her with sweet words. She even began prying into the relationship between Clara Smith and William Brown. Whenever Mrs. Bay brought up the topic, Clara Smith would smile slyly. "Him? Oh, he's so good to me. He entrusts all the household matters to me, and the kids are obedient and well-behaved. Marrying into this family, I couldn't be happier. By the way, Mrs. Bay, I heard your hen clucking earlier. Did it lay an egg? My house happens to be short of 1 egg. Oh, I just remembered I have work in the fields. I'll take my leave now." Mrs. Bay rolled her eyes and disappeared in a flash, as quick as lightning. "Humph, lucky for you, I'm too busy to argue right now. Once I'm done with the basics, I'll settle accounts with you one by one." Clara Smith huffed softly. William Brown had a hard time finishing the chair, and it was finally time for the two of them to head to town for shopping. Edward Brown and Henry Brown were adamant about not going along. Edward Brown said, "That tiny town has nothing interesting. Going there is just a waste of time. Staying home to read and play is much better." Henry Brown, on the other hand, really wanted to go, but his older brother forbade him, so he obediently stayed home. Clara Smith made onion pancakes and left them in the kitchen for the two boys. Then, carrying Sophia Miller, she stepped outside to meet William Brown. William Brown had already placed the chair on the cart and added a cushion in the corner of the cart. "Hop on." "Oh, you even left space for me?" Clara Smith exclaimed, both surprised and delighted. This man was improving. William Brown replied coldly, "I'm a man. I wouldn't let my wife suffer by walking." Clara Smith quickly nodded. "You're so thoughtful." She then placed Sophia Miller on the cart and sat down. However, she didn't realize that her compliment startled William Brown. He immediately put on a stern face. "I'm doing this only because you're a woman, and I'm worried about you walking under the scorching sun while carrying Sophia Miller. Don't read too much into it." "Huh? Read too much into what?" Clara Smith looked confused. Seeing her expression, William Brown suddenly felt a tightness in his chest. Looking at her like this, why did he feel like he was the one overthinking here? Chapter 021. Upset, he gritted his teeth and turned away. "It's best if you don't overthink." Then he pulled the cart. "Let's go." Seeing this, Clara Smith pouted. "Here we go again." A grown man, yet his temper is worse than a woman's. So hard to please. William Brown's hand, which was gripping the cart handle, suddenly tightened. He quickened his pace, channeling his anger into strength, pulling the cart forward at a rapid speed. What normally took an hour only took half that time as William Brown pulled the cart loaded with belongings, along with Clara Smith and Sophia Miller, to their destination. They headed straight to the furniture shop in town. The shop assistant and the manager clearly knew him well. As soon as they arrived, the assistant hurried out to greet them, and the manager stepped out from behind the counter to welcome them. "Brother Brown, you're here. Let me take a look at the furniture you made this time." Excellent. This design, this craftsmanship, everything is outstanding. Truly worthy of someone with experience from the provincial capital. Your designs are even better than those of the local carpenters." The manager showered praise on the chair and its maker before calling someone from accounting to bring out the payment. When the accountant brought the money, the manager turned to William Brown and said, "Brother Brown, about what I mentioned to you last time, have you given it any thought?" I already made myself clear last time. I'm not doing it. William Brown replied without hesitation. Ah, don't be so quick to refuse. Your skills are exceptional. What future do you have as a carpenter in the countryside? If you come work at our shop, with just these hands of yours, you'll surely make a fortune. Within 2 years, you could buy a house in town. Settle down here, and your children will have better opportunities and a brighter future. As the manager finished speaking, Clara Smith noticed a flicker of disdain in William Brown's eyes. No need. Life in the countryside is good, and the kids like it there, he replied coolly. Ah! The manager sighed in disappointment and quickly turned to Clara Smith. Sister-in-law Brown, aren't you going to persuade your husband? I'll follow his lead. Clara Smith blurted out. After all, they would eventually leave anyway, and she didn't want to meddle in the Brown family's affairs. Whatever William Brown decided, that was final. The manager was completely at a loss. You two will regret this, mark my words. We won't. William Brown replied firmly. He took the money from the accountant and waved to Clara Smith. Let's go! Clara Smith hurriedly followed behind. Seeing the couple leave without hesitation, the shopkeeper's face darkened. I really don't understand. Why does he insist on staying in that countryside? What's so good about it? Who knows? Maybe he looks down on our town. The assistant suddenly chimed in. The shopkeeper spun around. They're still living in that countryside. What right do they have to look down on our town? But after all, they came from the provincial capital. Surely, they must think little of this small town. They probably believe only a county town is worthy of their status. The assistant muttered softly. The shopkeeper's expression grew even heavier. Seeing this, the assistant quickly lowered his head and silently retreated to the back courtyard. When the furniture shop was far behind them, Clara Smith finally spoke in a low voice. That shopkeeper was so eager to win you over. It seems his intentions aren't entirely pure. You should be cautious when dealing with them in the future. He's taken a liking to my craftsmanship and wants me to work for him for life. William Brown replied. Oh, so you already figured it out. Then I don't need to say more. Clara Smith felt reassured and immediately changed the subject. I didn't expect the furniture you make to be so beautiful. The pieces you brought today made everything else in that shop look dull in comparison. William Brown glanced at her. If you have something to say, just say it directly. All right. Clara Smith stuck out her tongue. I noticed the cradle at Sophia Miller's house. The wood looks exactly like the chairs you brought today. You made that cradle too, didn't you? Yes. Really? That's wonderful. Can you make a small chair for Sophia Miller as well? She's grown now. It's not suitable for her to stay in the cradle all the time. William Brown frowned. She's still so young. How could she sit on a chair? You can't keep an eye on her all the time. What if she falls? That's easy. We just need to add a little guard in front of the chair. Clara Smith blurted out, her mind filled with images of modern children's chairs. William Brown didn't understand her idea, so Clara Smith gestured animatedly to explain. The more she explained, the more confusing it became. Finally, she waved her hand decisively. All right, when we get home, I'll draw it for you. Then you'll understand. You can draw too? William Brown asked in surprise. Of course. Just wait, I'll show you. Clara Smith nodded proudly. In her previous life, that was exactly how she earned her living. William Brown still seemed skeptical. Clara Smith caught a glimpse of his gaze, and a surge of anger rose within her. This man clearly looked down on her. No matter what she said, he wouldn't believe her and kept forcing her to prove herself over and over again. Fine. This time, she would make him see the truth. Her mood took a sharp turn for the worse as her profession was doubted. Clara Smith stormed ahead in frustration, leaving William Brown behind. Seeing her seething with anger, William Brown unexpectedly felt a sense of amusement. So she could get angry too? He had thought this little woman only knew how to grin foolishly. The corners of his mouth curled up unconsciously, as he quickly pushed the cart to catch up with her. The two first stopped by a grocery store to buy enough rice and flour to last a month. Clara Smith carefully selected some additional spices, and then they headed to the bookstore to purchase white paper and ink for Long and his younger brother. Just a stack of ordinary white paper, along with a box of tranquil pine ink, cost 2 taels of silver. Hearing this price, Clara Smith felt her heart twist in pain. This year, studying truly burned money. To think that William Brown had worked tirelessly making countless tables and chairs, only to sell them for a mere 200 cash in total. Initially, she thought that price was fair, but now, seeing William Brown casually take out the money to pay, Clara Smith felt like coughing up blood. As they left the bookstore, she couldn't hold back and asked him, "You all are constantly struggling to make ends meet, aren't you? This has nothing to do with you. Anyway, I still have enough money to support the whole family." William Brown replied coldly. Humph, still guarding against her. Did she ever intend to meddle with their family fortune? Clara Smith huffed in frustration. "Fine, don't say anything. Who wants your measly coins anyway?" The two of them arrived at the fabric shop. Clara Smith had been enthusiastically planning for hours. She wanted to buy at least 2 outfits for each family member. For Sophia Miller, even more. After all, she's a girl, and girls need plenty of beautiful clothes. She had even mapped out her plans. Pink, yellow, blue, all kinds of colors had to be purchased. She wanted her daughter to dress differently every day. But as soon as they stepped into the fabric shop, her enthusiasm was doused by the harsh reality. Chapter 022. An argument before her lay piles of fabric in black, dark blue, and other subdued tones. Though there were slight variations in shade, aside from these somber colors, there was hardly anything else. The only exception was a roll of bright red cotton fabric. Clara Smith eagerly asked about the price. 8 coins per yard? That's outrageous. Hey, cotton fabric is cheap, but dyeing it is expensive. If you can't afford it, there's plenty of black fabric over there, cheap and durable, take your pick. Judging by Clara Smith's attire, the shopkeeper assumed she couldn't afford the red fabric and didn't bother being polite. Clara Smith gritted her teeth, while William Brown's face darkened. He pulled Clara Smith along. "Enough, this isn't the only fabric shop in town. Let's go somewhere else." But even if they went elsewhere, colored fabric wouldn't likely be much cheaper. Clara Smith thought to herself. And she was right. At the next shop, the selection of colored fabric was still dismal. Fortunately, the shopkeeper there was far friendlier. "Are you picking fabric to make clothes for your daughter? This peach pink fabric is lovely. A yard of it would make a perfect jacket for her. It'll look adorable. What do you think?" "Well, I guess this will have to do," Clara Smith sighed. All her initial plans had fallen apart. She bought a single yard of peach pink fabric for Sophia Miller, while for herself and William Brown, she reluctantly chose dark blue fabric. But still, she couldn't bring herself to accept this compromise. Suddenly, an idea struck Clara Smith. "Shopkeeper, do you have any white fabric?" "We do. But what do you need white fabric for?" William Brown's face fell. "We're not in mourning. We don't need white fabric. I want to buy white fabric to dye it myself," Clara Smith declared. "I know a few methods for dyeing fabric. We can do it ourselves at home, choose any color we want, and it'll be much cheaper." The more she thought about it, the better the idea seemed. She decisively said, "Forget the other colors. We'll just take white. Give me a few more yards of it." Ridiculous. William Brown immediately shouted. If you want to cause trouble, do it alone. Don't drag us into it. Don't even think about it. But I really know how to dye fabric, Clara Smith said softly. William Brown didn't believe her and bluntly told the shopkeeper, just stick with the colors and sizes we discussed earlier. Cut it! No, I don't agree, Clara Smith insisted firmly. If you won't let me have a say, fine. Then I'll take care of my part myself, all right? Give me the money for the fabric to make my clothes, and I'll handle it on my own. I promise I won't run around your house wearing plain white clothes. Is that acceptable? After numerous dealings with her, William Brown realized this was Clara Smith's ultimate limit. Once she reached this point, if she got mad, even he couldn't handle it, especially since they were still out in public. Reluctantly, he nodded. Fine, do as you wish. Only then did Clara Smith smile. She quickly told the shopkeeper, keep everything else the same, but the few yards of fabric I want should all be white. After buying the fabric, they had everything they needed for the day. William Brown immediately pushed the cart, ready to leave town, but Clara Smith quickly called out to him. Wait, let's stop by the pharmacy for a moment. Are you sick? William Brown asked, suddenly feeling tense. No, I just want to buy alum, Clara Smith replied. You need alum to dye fabric. She really had a plan, didn't she? William Brown frowned slightly, but still headed to the nearest pharmacy. Clara Smith bought half a pound of alum, carefully wrapped in oiled paper, and cheerfully walked out. Seeing her holding the alum package and smiling as brightly as a flower, William Brown suddenly didn't feel as annoyed about her insistence on buying so much white fabric. Oh well, let her do whatever she wants. After all, she's just a teenage girl, he thought to himself. The group then headed back to the village. As soon as they reached the village entrance, William Brown's expression darkened. He pushed the cart straight toward their home. Clara Smith hadn't even figured out what was going on when they got closer to the house. Then she heard arguing. You little brat. No father or mother to teach you manners, and now you dare to hit my son. Today, I'll teach you a lesson on their behalf. Who do you think you are to lecture me? You have no right to do that. Well, the failure from the city now dares to come back here and act superior to me? Let me show you whether I have the right or not. The sharp scolding of a woman mixed with the calm voice of a young boy, accompanied by bursts of wailing cries, created a chaotic clamor like a pot being stirred, leaving Clara Smith's head buzzing. But she quickly realized one thing. The calm voice reasoning belonged unmistakably to Edward Brown. No wonder William Brown had rushed over the moment he heard the commotion. While she was still lost in thought, William Brown had already pushed a cart to the front of the house. He immediately stopped. Stop this at once! The crowd froze in place. The woman who had just been grabbing Edward Brown ran over, clutching William Brown's sleeves with both hands. Edward's father, you're here just in time. Your two sons are something else. My child came to play with them, and not only did they refuse, but they also beat my child. Look at what they've done to him. You have to give me an explanation for this. If not, I won't let this go today. This woman was truly shameless, even daring. To twist the truth, both Edward Brown and Henry Brown were furious upon hearing this. Edward's small face turned icy cold, while Henry raised his voice in protest. It's obvious that they saw how tasty our cakes were and wanted to snatch them. When we didn't let them, they hit us. When they couldn't win, you adults came to help them beat us. So what? Isn't it just a cake? My son wanted to play with you and was kind enough to eat one of your cakes. If he didn't want to play, even if you begged him, he wouldn't touch it. Cakes like these, who doesn't have them at home? Look at the pathetic state of you people. These cakes are probably the best thing you'll ever eat in your entire lives. The woman ranted harshly as soon as she opened her mouth. This shameless behavior made Henry Brown burst into tears. William Brown was so angry that he was at a loss for words. "Let go!" he growled at the woman, clutching his sleeve tightly. The woman remained stubborn. "You must apologize to my son first, and then compensate for his medical expenses. Only then will I let go. If you don't, I won't release you. I'll drag you all over the village so everyone knows what kind of people you are." "You?" William Brown's face turned red with fury, but he restrained himself from taking action. He was a man, after all, and couldn't bring himself to hit a woman. Clara Smith couldn't endure it any longer. "Move aside, let me handle this." Chapter 023. Victory in the fight. She rolled up her sleeves and charged forward, grabbing the arm of the woman clinging to William Brown. With a forceful twist, she yanked it hard. "Ah! It hurts so much!" The woman screamed in pain, her grip on William Brown's sleeve loosening. Clara Smith seized the opportunity to pull William Brown toward her. The other woman staggered a few steps, but, regaining her balance, immediately lunged forward aggressively. "You wretch! How dare you touch me? I'll fight you to the death." Clara Smith quickly shoved Sophia Miller into William Brown's arms and charged straight at the woman. "You dare to insult my son? Flirt with my husband? And now you come to provoke me? Today, I'm going to scratch your face to shreds." The two women quickly started brawling. The villagers who had gathered to watch the commotion were stunned. The women in the village usually only quarreled verbally, and rarely resorted to physical fights. No matter how heated the argument, it was typically just loud shouting with no real action. But Clara Smith, this petite young wife, didn't hold back at all. She charged in, punching and kicking without hesitation. William Brown stood to the side holding Sophia Miller, completely dumbfounded. Fights between women generally involved hair-pulling, scratching, and biting. Clara Smith, though lacking much real-life combat experience, was well-versed in theory. So, she closed her eyes and focused on scratching at the woman's face and neck with all her might. In short, she didn't give her opponent a single chance to catch her breath or fight back. Luckily, despite her small stature, Clara Smith had built remarkable endurance from years of farm work since childhood. While she didn't possess great strength, her stamina was exceptional. Initially, the larger woman had the upper hand, but gradually, she began to tire. Moreover, Clara's petite frame gave her another advantage: quick reflexes. By the end of the scuffle, Clara Smith had pinned the larger woman to the ground. Gripping her opponent's chin with one hand, Clara looked down from above and sneered coldly. "Well, do you still want my son to apologize? Do you still expect us to pay for medical expenses? I don't want anything anymore. Let me go!" the woman cried out in fear. This woman was infamous in the village for her sharp tongue and quarrelsome nature, often emerging victorious in disputes by sheer audacity and aggressiveness. Most people couldn't match her fierce demeanor and thick skin. But today, she had met her match in Clara Smith. Never in her wildest dreams did she expect Clara to bypass all arguments and resort to action immediately. Clara didn't even bother with words, she simply acted. That's right, the unruly woman, who never played fair herself, had now encountered someone even more unyielding than she was. And she was terrified. The poor fear the reckless, and the reckless fear those who have nothing to lose. Clara Smith was clearly the latter. "Now, apologize to my husband and son," Clara demanded firmly. "Why should I? I won't. I'm sorry. The woman quickly caved as Clara's icy glare intensified, and she hastily apologized to William Brown and his son. But Clara wasn't done yet. "And your son, he needs to apologize to my son too. Son, apologize." The woman, now thoroughly subdued, didn't dare resist anymore. The chubby boy, who had been watching his mother suffer such humiliation at Clara's hands, was so terrified his heart was still racing. Realizing he was next, he quickly apologized with genuine fear and sincerity. Only then did Clara release her grip. "You can leave now." The woman hurriedly got up, pulling her son along as they fled. Watching their figures disappear into the distance, the other children who had previously bullied Edward and Henry quickly scattered as well. Clara Smith paid them no mind. She rushed over to Edward Brown and Henry Brown. "Are you two okay? Are you hurt anywhere?" As she spoke, she carefully checked the injuries on her two stepsons. The two brothers, Edward and Henry, were still in shock. This was the first time they had ever witnessed the village's fierce women fighting, and one of them was their stepmother. Moreover, she won. Most importantly, she fought for them. From the moment Clara Smith took action until the bullies fled in panic, the vivid scenes played out before their young eyes, leaving their innocent hearts deeply shaken. It wasn't until Clara Smith touched and examined them that the two brothers snapped out of it. Edward Brown hurriedly pushed her away. "I'm fine." Henry Brown, on the other hand, seemed to enjoy having Clara Smith gently cradle his small face. He quickly said, "It's just a scratch, no big deal. They couldn't beat me anyway." Though this little boy was just over 3 years old, he was incredibly strong, so much so that even Edward Brown often found himself no match for him. So, for the other kids to think they could bully him with force was asking for trouble. Clara Smith sighed in relief. "That's good." She turned and gave instructions to William Brown. "Quick, bring the stuff from the cart into the house, and then we're leaving." "Leaving? Where to?" William Brown still didn't grasp the situation. Clara Smith shot him a sharp look. "This isn't the first time something like this has happened, is it?" William Brown immediately turned to his sons. Edward Brown, with a serious expression, nodded. "Yes, sir. But before, they would just taunt us and leave. Today, though, when they saw the pastry in my brother's hand, they insisted on taking it. My brother refused, so they started fighting. And that's how the commotion escalated." William Brown's face darkened. "Why didn't you tell me about this earlier?" Edward Brown pressed his lips tightly together, saying nothing. Henry Brown glanced around nervously before whispering, "Big Brother said you're already tired enough, and we shouldn't bother you with small matters like this." William Brown paused, a strange expression appearing on his face. Clara Smith sighed. "We must resolve this matter thoroughly today, otherwise it will only lead to endless trouble later. You all agree, don't you?" William Brown nodded. "Yes." "Then put the stuff down, and let's go find the village chief to demand justice," Clara Smith exclaimed. William Brown immediately understood her intent. He quickly nodded. "All right." He promptly unloaded the goods from the cart. While he was unloading, Clara Smith took the opportunity to pick up the crushed, dirt-covered scallion pancake, wrapped it up, and glanced at him. "Are you done?" "All done." "Then let's go." She placed Sophia Miller into William Brown's arms, grabbed each of her two sons by the hand, and strode toward the village chief's house. As they walked, she didn't forget to wink at her two sons. "Cry for me. Cry as loudly as you can." Edward Brown immediately pinched Henry Brown's arm hard. Henry Brown couldn't hold back and burst into tears. Hearing her brother cry, Sophia Miller's face crumpled, and she began crying as well. The loud cries of the two children quickly echoed throughout the village. Chapter 024, Elegant Confrontation. The corners of Clara Smith's mouth twitched. "Who pinches their own younger brother like that? I can't cry on command," Edward Brown said. "Besides, my brother's voice is loud enough. His crying alone is like the two of us combined. Add Sophia Miller's crying, and it's more than enough." With that, the boy took the lead, striding forward. Let's go! Clara Smith shook her head in exasperation. However, the cries of Henry Brown and Sophia Miller echoed outside, quickly prompting the villagers to open their windows and look out. Even without Edward Brown's cries, the effect was still passable. Well, this will have to do. Edward Brown, though young, was incredibly stubborn. Clara knew she couldn't change him, at least not in the short term. She quickly dismissed the thought, grabbed the hands of the two children, and hurried straight to the village chief's house. Henry Brown's voice was truly a gift from heaven, his wailing carried non-stop from their home all the way to the chief's residence, adding Sophia Miller's cries to the mix. Before they even arrived, the sound of the two children sobbing had already reached the courtyard. Thus, when William Brown knocked on the door, the chief's son promptly came to open it. At that moment, Clara Smith discreetly pinched her waist. It hurt so much. Tears immediately rolled down her cheeks as she sobbed. "Second uncle, you must seek justice for us." The chief's son, seeing this scene, felt his head was about to explode. "If there's an issue, come inside to talk." "No way, I have to speak here, for the whole village to hear. I've done nothing shady that needs to be discussed behind closed doors." Clara Smith raised her voice, pushing the two boys forward before unwrapping the oiled paper in her hand and spreading the crumbs of bread on the ground. "Second uncle, though my husband hasn't been back from the provincial capital for long, he is still a true son of Brown Village. My children carry the Brown surname. Their names are properly recorded in the family registry. We are all Browns, no one is above another. So why is it that just because my family has fewer people and I'm a woman, they think they can bully us? You must give us justice for this." The old village chief hadn't witnessed Clara Smith's altercation with the other women in the village, but hearing her sharp, commanding tone, he immediately knew this young woman was no pushover. The veins on his forehead twitched as he felt a foreboding sense that this matter would be difficult to resolve. Even so, he had no choice but to step outside. Fortunately, when he appeared, Clara Smith did not rush over, crying and kneeling to hug his legs while sobbing and lamenting. She simply bowed slightly and softly said, "Second uncle, please forgive us. Today, we were pushed to the brink and had no choice but to trouble you." William Brown and the children quickly paid their respects as well. Indeed, being a family that had returned from the city and experienced so much, they were truly different. Even the newlywed bride, who had only been part of the family for a few days, had already been taught proper manners so thoroughly. The old clan leader nodded in satisfaction, his heart already leaning toward Clara Smith and her children. "What's the matter? Tell me everything." Clara Smith quickly recounted the incident that had just occurred at the doorstep. At the end, she nudged Edward Brown forward. "Edward, go ahead and tell your story." Edward Brown then recounted the events after their family returned, explaining how the village children occasionally came to their door to cause trouble. Although he was only 8 years old, the boy spoke clearly and concisely, summarizing the entire story in just a few sentences. He even described in detail who the troublemakers were, what they looked like, and what they had said. After hearing everything, the old clan leader ordered his son to summon all the families involved. And that was that. Soon enough, everyone involved was gathered, including the woman Clara Smith had knocked down earlier. Her husband was named Brian, and in the village, people referred to her as Brian's wife. Brian's wife and her son now had swollen heads. The moment they returned home, barely having time to sit down, the clan leader's son came to call them, saying the old clan leader needed to see them urgently. Now, upon seeing Clara Smith's entire family standing in front of the clan leader's house, anger flared up within her. "Well done, Smith family. Your son hit my son, you hit me, and you even forced us to apologize to you. And that wasn't enough? Now you've come to report us to the clan leader? Do you have no shame? Even though her anger made her want to tear Clara Smith apart, the pain from her injuries held her back. She could only drop to her knees with a thud, clutching the hem of the old clan leader's robe tightly with both hands. Second uncle, you must look into this carefully. Who is bullying whom today? My son and I were beaten to this state. If you side with them, how can we survive? We'd rather drown ourselves in the river and be done with it. Seeing her use his clothing as a handkerchief to wipe her nose, the old clan leader felt deeply annoyed. She even dared to use the threat of death to pressure him? Did she think his years of being a clan leader amounted to nothing? Irritated, the old clan leader said, "Who told you they came to settle scores with you over today's events? William and his family came here to clarify everything with you." Brian's wife froze, quickly raising her head. She didn't come to report us? She didn't believe it. The old clan leader frowned. Do you think William and his family are like you country bumpkins, only knowing how to hover around your own fields? Stand up right now. In broad daylight, a woman clinging to my coat. Don't you feel ashamed? I'm embarrassed for you. Madam Brown, the third wife, stood up awkwardly but didn't forget to glare at Clara Smith. Even though the old clan leader said so, she still didn't believe that Clara Smith's family wasn't here to tattle. Humph, just because they're from the city and have a bit of knowledge, they think they can talk their way out of everything. The others thought the same. Thus, everyone looked at their family with guarded expressions. The old clan leader saw it all and understood. Everything Edward had just said was true. The villagers truly didn't see their family as part of the community. This matter indeed needed to be resolved quickly. Once everyone was present, the old clan leader said to William Brown, "All right, William, if you have something to say, speak up." "Yes." William Brown immediately stepped forward, clasped his hands, and bowed to everyone around. "I've gathered everyone here today because my children have been bullied. Previously, I didn't know about it, so I didn't react. But today, I found out that ever since we moved here, some people in the village have believed that we came to compete for benefits. They've been bad-mouthing us behind our backs. And not only that, but you even took advantage of my absence to bully my children? This is something I cannot tolerate. Today, we must clarify everything, and you must apologize to my children." Chapter 025. Piercing words, how arrogant this man is. Many villagers were indignant. Isn't it just kids fighting? Such a small matter. Why make such a fuss and even call the clan leader here? Once or twice might be a small matter. But if it keeps happening, 3 months of constant trouble, then it's no longer small. William Brown raised his voice. The villagers still looked indifferent. You city folks are so petty, treating your kids like treasures. We raise our kids freely here, letting them grow on their own, and don't they all turn out healthy? Exactly. Like father, like son. Your kids have been learning from you since they were little, thinking ignorance is amusing and bullying others is normal. When they grow up, they'll be just like you, working hard in the fields and giving birth to another bunch of kids just like them. Generation after generation, repeating the fate of your ancestors without any way out. If that's the case, then you really don't need to bother teaching your kids anything, because the worst-case scenario is already set," Clara Smith said calmly. Her words were cutting to the extreme. Many men were so enraged they rolled up their sleeves. "What did you just say? Did you dare to insult us? Watch me beat you to death." William Brown immediately grabbed the fist of the man who charged at him first, twisting it slightly. "Aw, ouch, ouch, ouch." The man grimaced in pain, his fiery anger from moments ago completely extinguished. William Brown still didn't let go. He directly lifted his hand, hoisting the man entirely off the ground. Being naturally tall and muscular, towering over the man by a whole head, and with long limbs, William made it seem as though he was suspending the man midair effortlessly. He even shook him a little, causing the man to dangle like a noodle, terrified to the point of tears. "William, please, put me down. By family ties, I'm still your uncle. And as an uncle, you think it's acceptable to bully your nephew's wife like this?" William Brown asked coldly. "It was her who was rude to me first," the man muttered under his breath. William's voice deepened. "What did you say?" "I was wrong. I won't do it again," the man hurriedly admitted. "Ton, come here and apologize to her immediately." The man's son, seeing his father being humiliated, angrily rushed out from the crowd. "Let my father go, or you'll regret it." William Brown didn't even flinch at the threat. When the son kicked at him, William calmly caught his leg and lifted him into the air as well. "Anyone else have a problem with my wife? Feel free to step forward. Better yet, why not all come at once?" William taunted the onlookers. His arrogance grew more and more audacious. Many people were left speechless with anger. But seeing how easily he dangled two grown men like they were mere chicks, no one dared to step forward. One particularly bold man shouted, "What are we afraid of? No matter how strong he is, he's just one man with two hands. There are so many of us, surely we can take him down together. Let's see who dares to make a move." The old patriarch could no longer endure it. He immediately shouted loudly, causing the group of men who were about to act to fall silent instantly. After scolding them, the old patriarch quickly turned to William Brown and said, "William, let them go quickly. Look, Ton's face has turned completely pale. Yes, for the sake of the patriarch, I'll let them go." William Brown finally loosened his grip and threw the father and son to the ground. Thud, thud. Two loud thuds echoed, shaking the ground and making everyone's hearts pound. William Brown clasped his hands and respectfully bowed to the old patriarch. "Second uncle, I sincerely apologize. I didn't want to do this, but Clara is my wife. As a man, if I can't protect my wife, then how can I call myself a man?" The old patriarch sighed helplessly. "I understand. I don't blame you for this. But your wife's words earlier were a bit harsh." "Clara." Smith quickly nodded. "Second uncle is right. I shouldn't have spoken like that earlier. Actually, the fault doesn't lie with the children, but with these adults. Aren't children taught by adults? These people have lived to this age, and still haven't matured. Seeing our family return from the city, they thought we were fallen phoenixes no better than country chickens, just waiting to mock us. Yet, our children are beautiful, educated, and literate, so they'd become envious to the point of madness." As she spoke, her gaze shifted to the villagers, who still wore disgruntled expressions. Her icy, contemptuous eyes made them feel deeply guilty. "Even though we've fallen on hard times, we still strive to live well and hold our heads high again. But you people can't stand it. You only want to drag us into the mud, to be filthy and sullied like you. So behind our backs, who knows how many vile things you've fabricated about us? Isn't it because of your instigation that your children repeatedly target mine? You, who lack ambition and yet seek to destroy others, hindering their progress, are committing the greatest sin of all. The ones who deserve condemnation are parents like you." Her sharp words cut even deeper than before. The villagers were left in turmoil, unable to muster any rebuttal. Of course, there was another extremely crucial reason: William Brown's overwhelming strength. The father and son had managed to get back on their feet for a while now, but were still clutching their arms and legs, groaning in pain. Hearing Clara Smith's words, the old patriarch's eyes suddenly widened, as if he had been enlightened. "So that's it. Now I understand.